This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
And we are back with another episode of Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod, t.me/artofdarkpod for the Telegram channel, growing constantly, always fun, a little unruly in there at times, but that's actually pretty good. I will show up after a few hours. I'm like, 137. Okay, all right.
Yeah, half of them are me.
Yeah. That's right. So yeah, Twitter is at Art of Dark Pod if you want to bug me. Apparently, if you want to bug Kevin, get on him. Get Telegram on the Telegram channel
on the T-gram.
Is that? Are you trying to make that happen?
Oh boy,
maybe it'll work. Any other housekeeping we got to do, Kevin? Is that?
Well, just the book club is coming. Season 3 is coming. We have a season 3 trailer on the website, artofdarkpod.com. 90-second banger that Brad put together. We are also on YouTube. We are going to keep this. It's just a pure audio podcast. We're never going to sort of drift into the territory where we're screen sharing and grab this and change that. But we are on YouTube with video now. So
yeah,
I'm kind of trying to.
Kevin, I noticed Kevin's hair looks better than it usually does.
Yeah. Well, I doubled down. I bought more of the special shampoo that I have.
Nice.
Your hair as well, Brad.
Fabulous. This always looks good. So.
But listen, even if you're one of the people who checks us out on Spotify, iTunes, it doesn't cost you anything to go to YouTube and subscribe. That helps our numbers. Please do that. We're growing the show. Season 3, book club. Patreon goes to $5 on January 1st. If you get in now at $3 a month, you are grandfathered in. We've got some amazing stuff coming for the book club. Aaron Gwynn's going to join us for the first reading, which is going to be Heart of Darkness. And all the information is going to be on the website and at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. And then we're doing one more thing. We're doing, and this is on the website, we're doing an Eyes Wide Shut, my favorite Christmas movie, watch along in the Telegram. And you can hear our guest, and that's going to be later this month, later in December. So get on the website, the date, the information is there. We're doing that with Dexter De La Paz, friend of the show. Boom.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Excellent. So yeah, that's fantastic. Now let's get into our episode, what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about, and we're going to have as much fun as we possibly can, but I got to admit, last couple days doing just like nonstop listening, I got a little bummed out. We're going to try to keep that energy out of this, but we're doing an episode on the late, great Norm MacDonald. So I hope, if you're listening to this, I hope you're a fan, I think, of Norm MacDonald. If you're not quite, you don't really know him, I think you will be by the time we're through with this. Fascinating guy, hilarious guy, great stand-up or greatest stand-up, I think is really the question. And to help us, we have a friend of the show who helped us out with the Bill Hicks episode. That is the great Blake Hammond. Blake, welcome to the show. Thank you for your time. At Big Rad Machine. I didn't enunciate clearly. I was doing a little Norm there. I was Big Rad Machine. Recently released Blake 182 on YouTube. It's fantastic. I was listening to it for a second time today. So good, so funny. So I know it's maybe a little overstated to say something's raw, but it is kind of raw. It feels like it. Yeah, it's great. So please go out there and watch it. Yeah.
Yes, please watch it. It's like the first 8 years of my stand-up, essentially. That's just what came out. It's fun. A little production company since I did it. It's yeah, man, it's just jokes. We like jokes. You'll like it.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's fun.
Dude, I'm not going to give any away, but like there's a bit where you start reading your own tweets, and it's so good because like they're all bangers. It's banger after banger, but like I don't know, I felt like there was like this kind of awesome crossing of the streams thing happening. I don't know, it really worked.
Man,
it was really hilarious
because it's like I write all these jokes on Twitter, and it feels like they're all just one-liners. So it's like I don't do that in my act. And I mean, people on the internet are like, "Why do you use note cards? You're the fucking biggest piece of shit."
Right.
It's like it's supposed to be silly. Like it's like that's what makes it sillier. But yeah, man, that's like my favorite bit to do. It's I can talk shit about Tucker and also Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg and yeah, man, it's just fun and I mean it's fun to do those in like super liberal crowds. It's fun to do that in super conservative crowds because like people are like, "Oh, he's on our side." It's like I'm not on anybody's side.
Yeah. No, that's the move I love. Is it's like I'm not on your side, man. I'm just I'm just spraying.
Exactly. Yeah, dude. Because it's all I want everybody to have fun. It's not like ain't up there, ain't Bill Hicks. Yeah, I mean, like,
yeah.
I'm not making a point.
Right. Amen.
All right.
Yeah. Well, so let's on that note, I want to start with all right. So Norm MacDonald, a little bit later in the career, he does Norm MacDonald Live, which is a brief. I don't even know brief. It's a podcast that ran for 3 seasons and then kind of became the Netflix show. And they would do. He had guests on. It was sort of like a play on the old school late night talk shows in a way. And they would have a thing where they would read these blue card jokes.
Yes.
And they're great. And one of the best things about them is they're often and he would make the guests read them. He would read one and then the guest would read one. And one of the hilarious things about him is he would give the guests the most offensive one. So he just hands you a card with a terribly offensive joke on it, and you're supposed to read it, like it's nothing. So I'm going to pull up a couple random. There's a website that has all of them, and it just randomizes them when you're fresh. So I'm not picking this at all. This is just the website, the one it gives me. Michigan man Curtis Peterson received a 15-year prison sentence for having sex with his pet pit bull. What's that, Lassie? Woof, woof. Grandma got stuck in a well. Woof, woof. Oh, you got raped?
Jeez.
All right. Let's see if we can do one more. Let's see if we can do one more. Hold on. The refresh button, the refresh thing stopped working for a second. Okay. Let's be honest. Most people you see going skinny dipping are actually just going dipping.
Oh. Dude, one of my favorites was that Lindsay Lohan can't swim a stroke, but she sure knows every dive in town. I mean, like, it's so stupid, but it's so funny. That one, and then one about it was Jenny McCarthy and somebody else were getting married. It's like, yeah, it looks like they're about to have a honeymoon on fucking Retard Island.
All right, one more, and then we're gonna
one more, and then we got to get into the question tease after dark.
Okay,
and then
this one is important. This one requires a little bit of setup. Adam Egget, the guy who still around. He's the manager. He was the manager of the Comedy Store. I believe he's going to be managing Joe Rogan's new comedy club in Austin, supposedly.
Austin now,
And he played Norm MacDonald's sort of sidekick on this late podcast run, and the whole point was Norm MacDonald was beat up on him, basically. That's the whole gag, and it's hilarious, to hilarious effect. And Adam Egget's not a comedian or anything; he's just a guy, a perfectly charismatic enough guy. But whatever. Here's the joke: a New Mexico man was arrested for urinating on a family at a Metallica concert, or as Adam Egget calls it, foreplay. We'll get to it, but one of the funniest bits I came across, late bits, is Adam Egett, Norm MacDonald live, and Adam Egett's there, and Norm MacDonald would tell the guests, he'd be like, and he's pointing at Adam Egett, he's like, this guy's a Holocaust denier, don't you?
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in the Holocaust. And Adam's like, I'm a Jew, I had a bar mitzvah, and Norm's like, he's always telling me about 6 million, one's too many, but oh my God.
I can hear his voice. I don't know if I could do a Norm, but it's like, hey, Adam Egett. I can't do it.
Yeah, no,
like you can just hear it in your inner ear. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh man, amazing.
Okay. Sorry, got off track because we didn't ask the first question. Now I've ruined it. Kevin, what do you know about Norm MacDonald?
Great Canadian or greatest Canadian?
Ooh,
that's another question I'll throw into the mix here. SNL. That format, I believe he originated it. What was it called? The
Weekend Update.
Yeah, the Weekend Update. Did he?
No, he would have originated.
No. Okay, good. I'm getting. Yep. But he inherited it. But he's the guy you think of when you think of Weekend Update for sure. And then of course that would metastasize into the Daily Show and everything else. Right? It became a whole thing. Yeah, I was watching some of his suicide joke clips because of something. Blake actually sent me something earlier today where he pulls out a gun. What does he say?
I don't think. I mean, call me old fashioned, but I don't think the comics have to resort to shock to humor people, and then he pulls out a gun.
Yeah, your impression is better than mine. That's great. Yeah, so and it was like 10, 20 Kevorkian jokes all in a row, and I was sitting there going, more innocent times, the 90s, take it back or whatever. Yeah, but beyond that, I think I would describe myself as a casual fan. Gained a lot more respect for him, not after he passed, but toward his sort of twilight years. I kind of picked up on what he was doing. I loved his golf commentary on Twitter. It was so endearing, and just a great man with a voice, a Christian, which is something that struck me as sort of interesting. Those things in comedy at that level don't always you kind of go, okay, all right, very interesting. And then of course the final special was so very moving because of the context and everything, but much beyond that I do not know. However, well, one more, I got to tease something. We're going to do another SNL alum later this month in Gilda Radner, but today is about Norm. So that's what I know. All right.
Okay, yeah, no, that's all pretty much bang on. We're gonna find there's a lot more to it than that, obviously, but that's I think a good starting place and probably reflective of the average person of our generation's knowledge of Norm MacDonald if they're paying much attention. So we're going to, in the After Dark, I want to go more in depth on everybody. In case you didn't know, Norm passed to the public and to his friends, passed pretty suddenly. But it turned out that he'd actually been suffering from an illness for quite some time. So in the After Dark, we're going to go into that a little bit more deeply, kind of what the story of that actually is, but just know that's obviously we only cover people who've passed on. So Norm's not with us anymore. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that. And there is some interesting backstory and some interesting anecdotes. We're going to see evidence in his bits and his acts and the projects he was working on where you can see him actually sort of hinting at it if you were paying attention. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. So that's the After Dark for Patreon supporters only.
For Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. So every episode we do gets another 20 or 30 minutes. The other thing I forgot to mention is is it dirty business?
Dirty work.
Yeah, dirty work.
Dirty work. My lady showed me that, and she heard, and I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it.
So
and just today, she's like, I'd feel better if you had sent me some whores. she was quoting it. I'm like, okay, all right, we're ready to go.
Yeah,
sent me some hookers.
Yeah, that movie is so funny. It's sort of like that's a great. We're gonna talk about it. First, I want to kind of throw it to Blake. So, Blake, what does Norm MacDonald mean to you? Like, do you influence on you as a comedian? What does Norm mean to you?
he literally, I think it's the first time. Okay, so in 2010, I believe he released Norm doing stand up, and I remember watching. It's what got me back into, because I used to be obsessed with stand up as a kid, and then when I was in college, I was like, I drifted out of it, and then that special was like, oh, I absolutely love this. That whole like missing woman. It's like 9 minutes long, but I mean that bit is like probably my favorite bit of all time, stand up wise. But I remember we're doing Comedy Central was doing the roasts, and I made them watch because I heard Norm was going to be on Bob Saget. And I made all my friends sit, and we were all watching it at my house. And I remember being the only one laughing when Norm was on stage doing those old joke book jokes. And nobody got the bit. Like, and I just remember I was crying, laughing. Yeah. And I was like, oh, maybe this is just for comics. Maybe I should be a comedian. Like that was like, oh. And then I grew up watching him on Update. I remember him getting kicked off of Update. He's the greatest talk show guest of all time.
Oh yeah.
Jesus Christ. I mean, all of his, I was obsessed with Conan. So I remember watching him eviscerate Carrot Top on Conan. That was like the first big thing I remember, like, of him. Like, oh my God, this guy is just the funniest person in the world.
What did he do to Carrot Top?
So he had this girl on from 90210, and she was also going to be in Chairman of the Board. That was Carrot Top's big first movie. And he kept just going off, like interrupting their interview, and just kept hammering how much Carrot Top sucks. And at the end, they find out, she's like, it's called Chairman of the Board. And Conan goes, do something with that, you creep. And he goes, I bet it's spelled B-O-R-A-D or B-O-R-E-D.
Right.
And then
crowd erupts.
Conan, I mean, Conan gets up, he's like dying. It's the funniest fucking thing. It's so good. He's just so good.
Yeah, he probably, Norm, I mean, not that that movie was going to do good, but Norm probably single-handedly just torpedoed.
Sunk it, dude.
Yeah. No, and he is, as you're watching it, the stand-up is incredible. Weekend Update's great. Dirty Work's great. But to me, it's without question, he is the greatest talk show guest of all time. Like, there's not really anybody even close. Yeah.
I mean, the moth joke, the stuff about how his wife's a battle axe. I mean, he would just go on and do bits and then just destroy. I mean, when he got fired from SNL and went on Letterman, like, and talked about it, that was great. I mean, there's him and Spade on Dennis Miller's show from like HBO or whatever, and he just kept calling David Spade gay in different ways. It was so fucking funny. It's just so good, dude.
Yes. Yeah. We're going to talk about some of those when we get there, because there is a moment where he sort of that whole talk show thing, it was always building, and then at some point, like, that was almost his primary interface with the public, was these talk show appearances, and it stopped being about him promoting anything, and it was just like, no, you got to get Norm in every so often, right, to keep things fresh.
On the Battle Axe one, he was supposed to promote his fuking memoir.
Right,
it's not a memoir. And he goes, and he's opening it, and he goes, that's rich, and then closes the
book. So good. Oh, all right. So let's get it. Let's start telling this. This is the guy we're talking about, and I'm glad we can have some good laughs about it. Because, like I said, I got a little bummed sort of watching some of the end stuff, and you're like, oh man, give me one more special, give me a few more years, but nonetheless. So Norman Jean MacDonald, born October 17th, 1959, in Quebec City, Quebec. He's raised there until his family moves to Ottawa a few years later. Now, I want to stress something else. Normally, I've got like a big fat biography or something here to refer to. Here there isn't that. And Norm wasn't necessarily evasive, but he was a very private person in a lot of ways. And when he did talk, his primary goal was to make people laugh. So it didn't, to him, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter what was true. That's not what he was ever there for. In fact, in his last actual stand-up thing, right before the COVID lockdowns, he just offhandedly lies about his age and says he's 7 years older than he actually is for no reason. There's not it's not a bit. It's not a gag or anything. You're just like, wait, he's not that old. Like that doesn't, why? Yeah. So it's almost everything we're going to say about his life. There's a little, imagine there being a little asterisk next to it, because it's probably true. And I'm doing my best to tell you what I think I can verify, but there's still some mystery in here, which again is interesting because this is our most recent guy we've covered. And it's sort of like, you feel like you have some of the stuff more nailed down than this, but we just don't. Maybe somebody is working on the big biography of Norm MacDonald. I kind of hope so. Okay, so both of his parents are teachers. Norm would refer to being a dirt poor farmer, but I don't think that's actually true.
No, it's not true.
So, what is true apparently is his dad was a World War II combat veteran, was part of the Canadian Army that liberated the Netherlands, and I think that both of his parents taught at this Valcartier base. So it was they taught on an army base in Quebec City, at least when Norm was young. Maybe they might have had a small farm or something like that. It's not totally clear. He did have two brothers. One is Neil MacDonald, who's a little bit older, who's actually a well-known Canadian broadcast journalist. He'd be like the Peter Jennings or something of Canada. And he's even right now, apparently, is senior correspondent on a Canadian's like primetime news show on CBC. He's got a younger brother, Leslie. Couldn't really find anything out about Leslie. So I want to break like Norm's sort of pre-comedy life into these sort of three parts. Okay, so one's his youth in Quebec City. Don't know a ton about it. In his memoir, he says his memoir, which is not a memoir, it's called Based on a True Story. It's not a memoir.
It's all in French.
Right. Right. No, in his memoir, there's a part where he's like, he befriends this friendly old neighbor bachelor, and then the guy rapes him in a shed, and then he wakes up like 5 years later and like doesn't remember his childhood at all. That's what the memoir says is going on in his childhood. So I don't think that actually happened. Now Norm would later on say that his dad was like this very old man when Norm was born, but as far as I can tell, he was like in his early 40s. So it's not like he was, a senior citizen or something so I'm not sure where Norm got this from. But nonetheless, I think they kind of were in part of a sort of a smaller community within Quebec City. Whatever the case, Norm always talks about the fact that the only people that were ever really around when he was a kid were old men, right? And this is partially why either he's using this to sort of justify this thing, but it seems like this is partially why later on he kind of embodies this old-timey storyteller mode a lot of the time, right? Old jokes, an old way of speaking, old catchphrases and stuff like that. I think part of that might come from this time, sharing jokes with these old men. And he also, whenever he talks about who his favorite sort of celebrities are, actors or comedians, they're always like two generations before him. They're always like Bob Hope or Dean Martin. They're always like, he's always sort of casting back to like before he was born, often when they were in their prime. Yeah.
A fun thing to do, especially around the holidays, is to give yourself a few days, however long you can manage it, and only watch the old black and white from the whatever, as early as you can get. Watch that stuff for a few days, and it is like, it's like tripping because the reality is so different, and you can kind of almost the pace, and they'll come out drunk, and that's the entire bit is they've had too much egg. The entire whole special is about that. It's a different time. Yeah, it's kind of enjoyable. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think the latest comic that he loved was probably Rodney Dangerfield, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, that was probably the last one that he talked about that was like somewhat relevant.
Yeah. And Rodney Dangerfield even had even seemed like he was from a previous era in a way.
Yeah.
The way, the style of it and the gags of it. And there is a little bit of a please take my wife kind of thing to Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
But it was like he took that and then was like making it extremely dark. Sometimes, I mean, he was like talking about like killing himself and stuff. It's like,
right.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Intense guy. Oh my God. So there's a story. So one place I pretty much just got all this biographical stuff from just listening to everything I could, right? And there's a lot of people who knew him who gave interviews since he passed, and you kind of can get some stuff there. But one good source was this episode he did, the Mark Maron podcast, What the Fuck? Norm seemed to be pretty forthcoming, and he tells this story when he was a child. I'm going to assume it's true because it's not really that funny. So I kind of think it's true. So maybe it's not, but it didn't feel all that funny, and it felt kind of meaningful. He tells a story about how his dad told him to take this blind man shopping, right? Now it actually is kind of funny how I'm saying it. But anyway, he's supposed to walk with this old man to the store, right? And, he's a kid. He's like 8 or 10 or something like that. And Norm's taking this guy. He's holding this man's hand while they walk to the store. And the old man starts asking him to describe everything, like the cars and the street and, plants and in the store, what's on the shelves, just asking Norm to describe everything. And Norm talks about this like he had to sort of like pay attention in a way that he never really had to before, right? In order to describe this. Is just stuff he's normally walking right by. And at some point in this, he has this moment where he starts breaking up laughing, and he realizes that everything is funny. Like every aspect of being alive, if you look at it right, is hilarious. And he talks about this in relation to sometimes later in his life, he would get into like a laughing fit that would get like, he'd have to like calm himself down. He'd have to like find a way to like relax because he came across something that was so funny that he felt he could never, it would like work its way up into a panic attack almost.
Well, this reminds me of something. I can't remember who said this or if anybody did, but it's like, it reminds me of what Blake, you talked about at the beginning here. Like to be a great comedian, you have to be able to laugh. You have to kind of love to laugh, don't you? In most cases.
I think so. I think so. I mean, that's like, it's, even this is just a personal example, but I look at comics that I do not think are funny, and I watch them like in the room, like at a show, and they're not laughing and they're not paying attention and they're not enjoying what comedy is or can be. And it's kind of crazy. Like, it's like, oh, I see the difference in between who I think is good and bad. And I think to be a good comedian, you have to laugh. Like you have to like see how things are funny and see why things are funny. It's it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, why would jokes even occur? Why I feel like a joke, it has to occur to you that something is a joke, right? And that's your sense of humor. It's like how you pick what you're going to talk about. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so he clearly had it. I mean, later on, he has these interviews, and we're going to talk about. He gets what I think a lot of people would call sort of eccentric in his last, say, decade or two. Not in a Howard Hughes or something kind of a way, but he gets he gets, you'll put him on a panel with like some other kind of celebrities, and clearly he's the odd duck. He's the guy that does not fit in with this group, and this happens a bunch. But like he will talk about, somebody will ask him, it was like, are you happy? He says, well, I laugh a lot. He says, well, are you happy? He's like, I mean, if I'm laughing, I'm happy, so I must be happy, right? And it's like it's almost like something being funny, laughing at something. That's an emotional state that's beyond happiness somehow. Very kind of an interesting perspective on it.
Yeah, it's like it's almost euphoric.
Yeah,
I mean, like where you're saying where you're laughing so hard that you are almost in a state of panic, like that is. That is like as close to as getting high as you can without drugs, essentially.
Yeah,
sure. You also can't fake it, and like if somebody tries to fake a laugh, it can be very creepy.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
It's Yeah.
That's so unfortunate though with people with crazy laughs, because it's like Man, it's like they're not faking it, and they just have the worst laugh, and that sucks for them.
It makes everybody a laughing.
Oh man, you're gonna have, by the time as you progress in your career, you're gonna have like PTSD from all the different kinds of laughs that you're getting. I hadn't thought about that.
Oh man.
Well, it makes me think of Joker. That's one of the great things about that laugh that he has is so.
So Norm, so the thing about Norm as a child, he says that he was not a class clown at all, that he was actually almost pathologically shy as a kid. Like, he's the kind of kid who could not ask for help at a store, would not speak in class. But he also describes himself as like, if the class clown made a joke, he would be the guy that after class was talking to his friends and explaining to him why that wasn't funny. Right? It's like, it's like, this guy's you're in like fourth grade. Like, this guy's a hack.
Farting, what is that? Children. Right. It's like, we are children.
Right.
Born comedian. He's ready. He's ready to be standing in the back of the store, his arms crossed.
Right.
This guy.
It's so funny. Oh, you got muted there.
I should have got that special.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. So the MacDonald family moves to Ottawa. Norm attends, I think you say it Gloucester High, but it's Gloucester High in the Beacon Hill area. It's actually fairly decent. This is where him growing up dirt poor. I don't know what their financial situation was exactly, but I don't think they were quite dirt poor. It turns out that he actually grew up like 2 blocks away from where Tom Green grew up. And so though Tom Green is younger, later on, Norm MacDonald and Tom Green would strike up this interesting friendship. He would come on Tom Green's show, which was a much a forerunner to like what we're doing. Back in like 2004, he had like a video podcast in his basement. And Norm would come on there and they would just talk about Ottawa, the old days in Ottawa. It was really, really pretty interesting. Even though Tom Green's younger, they knew the same places and stuff like that, right? So some of the same people and that sort of thing. Really, really pretty interesting. He graduates. He sort of gets introduced to comedy mostly by his dad. He's watching Bob Hope on TV. He's watching Rich Little, who is this Canadian impressionist who's actually an amazing impressionist and can do an impression of anybody. And saw David Letterman perform stand-up live when he was a kid, when he was like 10 or 12. This would actually come up later. We will get to it when we talk about his runs on David Letterman. Now, here's the other thing is, Norm MacDonald is one of his moves, one of his styles is to play the dumb guy, right? It's kind of where he gets a lot of his humor, is sort of like that sort of like innocent, doesn't know what he's talking about, but has an insight sort of thing.
What's his line? The more I read about this Hitler fella,
it's a real jerk.
Yeah, this guy's a real jerk.
Is a real jerk.
Albert Fish. I'm just going to come out and say it. He's a real jerk.
Yeah, really funny.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Now, so he plays that, and he will talk about how he doesn't. He'll say sometimes he got an 8th grade education, right? Stuff like that. He graduated high school either at 16 or possibly at 14 years old, and went right to college. He was going to study mathematics at Carleton University, which is kind of a small private university in Canada. Didn't stick around there. Goes to Algonquin College to study journalism / broadcasting for a while. Also doesn't graduate out of there. So by the time he hits 18 or so, he's already been to 2 colleges and graduated high school. So smart dude. I don't think anybody, if you pay attention to him for more than a joke or two, I think it's pretty clear he's a smart guy. But it's funny that he plays off as, dirt poor farmer with an 8th grade education from the boonies. Meanwhile, he's sort of this like possible child prodigy-ish kind of figure, right? He's now after he does this, after he graduates from this, after he decides he's not going to continue the college thing, he does go on. He does sort of like, I don't know how to describe it exactly. He kind of fades out into like manual labor and very blue collar kind of jobs. He talks about taking a bus out to Vancouver, other side of the country, and getting with a temp service that would just like assign you random jobs. So he like worked on a garbage truck for a few days. He worked in lumber camps. He was apparently what's called a choker setter for a while. And I didn't know what this was, so I looked it up just out of interest, thinking about Norm MacDonald doing this as like an 18 or 19-year-old man. He's a choke setter, or a choker setter is a logger who attaches cables to logs for retrieval by skidders or skylines. The process involves the choker setter wrapping a special cable around a log and then moving clear so the yarding engineer can pull the log to a central area. In clear cutting, fallers will typically cut down all the trees and limb and buck them into logs before the choke setters and others arrive to remove the logs. So he's a lumberjack.
He's a lumberjack.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Right?
We go to the Paul Bunyan Play Center over here in the mall. My son loves Paul Bunyan.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so he was, in this time, whatever we're painting this picture of him, he's a lumberjack. He liked to booze when he was a young man. He liked to get in fights when he was a young man, right? Which if you see him in the 80s doing stand-up, he doesn't strike you as a hard drinking, hard fighting lumberjack. Telling these sort of nasally jokes about an answering machine,
Right, right. I think he got all that shit out of his system pre getting into comedy. So it was just like he did all this shit, and then it was like, oh, okay, well, I did that. I don't need to do it again. Like,
right. And he kind of comes to comedy a little bit on the late end in terms of, you hear stories about like Dave Chappelle started at 16 or whatever, right? Norm MacDonald starts at 25. He's 25 years old when he first goes up on stage, and he goes up. And partially, I think this is due to the fact that he's in Canada, he's in Ottawa. There's not really a lot of stand-up comedy around, and there's certainly not a lot of places to do stand-up comedy, right? And there's also not this pipeline that was in the United States of, all right, well, you can go to, if you live in a major city, you can do some sets. You're starting to get into the sitcom era, right? There's like a career. Norm talks about it like we didn't even really know what we were doing up there, And the place he starts is at this place called Yuck Yucks in Ottawa. And Yuck Yucks is still around. It would become there. I think there's 9 of them in Canada, started by this guy, Mark Breslin, who's really he's still around too. He's an amazing guy.
So really it's Yuck. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. 9 yucks.
That's a lot of yucks.
Yeah. But it's pretty cool, right? So Mark Breslin, no comedy clubs in Ottawa. He starts this thing in the basement of the community center. 10 years later, he's got multiple franchises of them. And Norm MacDonald's there pretty early, right? He's there, what would it be? 84, I think, when he goes on the first time, right? So now he loved comedy, obviously growing up, and wanted to do it. And yet he had, and would continue apparently throughout his career, to have a fair amount of performance anxiety. So after the first time he went on, I don't know. No, I couldn't find anywhere whether he did well, whether he bombed, whatever. But after he did it the first time, he basically said he wasn't going to do it anymore. And the manager of the club had to like convince him to come back on stage. Right? Had to talk him back into it. And this would, over time, I think he probably settled into it a little bit, obviously, but he would have like anxiety or panic attacks before he went on stage. He would have a really hard time talking himself into it. Yeah.
Me too.
Is that right?
It never goes away. Dude, it's like, I thought eventually it would go away. I started late too. I started at 24. I was like 24, almost 25. And that's the thing that always stopped me was the performance of it. It's still because you care about it. You don't want to fucking. It just never gets better. It never gets easier.
It's interesting. And I can see that, but it's interesting to pair that with, because Norm MacDonald has this reputation for just not giving a fuck, and not in that way is like he doesn't care about. It's one thing. this is easy for me to say because I don't do what you guys do, but like it's one thing to like not give a fuck about saying something offensive or offending people. Norm didn't seem to care about bombing. Like,
yeah,
in a way, like he was willing to bomb, you know.
I think it's hard to explain, but right when you get on stage, all of it goes away, and then you don't care for the next 45 minutes to an hour. But then you extremely care right when you get off stage. So yeah, probably in the moment where he's bombing, it doesn't really matter. But you get off stage and your feelings are like the most hurt they've ever been.
Right.
So
right.
I think that was. I mean, I don't know how that is just how it is for me. But yeah, when you get on stage, of course you don't give a shit. You're like, all right, well, this has happened before. But
you probably have to be in that space to perform well. I would think.
Absolutely.
Right? Otherwise, you're gonna get in your head.
Yeah, 100%.
Apparently, one thing that he would do, maybe not right off the bat, but in these yucks days, he would, if the set went well, he would just kind of disappear. He'd go to the green room or he'd leave or whatever. And if it went really poorly, he would stand out and like meet and greet people. Just to like shake their hand and be like,
so you liked it. You liked the show, huh?
Thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming out.
It's the greatest band of all time. It's so good, dude. That's so good. Because it's so, like, you don't know how hard it is, like, to go out. Because, I mean, when you do jokes that are even, like, I don't know, where you could piss people off, to go out and look them in the eyes again and be like, have a great night. It's like, that's so, it's amazing.
I love that detail, man. So 1985 he basically starts. 1986, like 6 months later, they put him in the Just for Laughs comedy festival in Montreal, right? And Norm describes this as like, there's only like 4 Canadian stand-ups. They had to put me in because there's barely any of us, right?
Nearly a hockey team.
Right.
Nearly a line in hockey. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he apparently does really well. I mean, he gets written up in like the Montreal newspaper as like the country's next hot comic, up and coming kind of guy. And also,
but that's like being like I was a chess champion in North Dakota. It's not, I'm sure there have been a lot of next hot. Yeah. Then you
that's because
it's over, bro.
You beat Doug. So
right.
So one other guy that played chess. So, but nonetheless, I mean, this was definitely a step forward from him, and he's starting to meet other comics too. So he tells this great story about meeting Sinbad and how Norm talks about he would have a memorized bit. He would have a memorized set. And he and Sinbad had gone shopping for socks or something. Sinbad needed socks, right? And I'm not going to do this try to do this whole story because it's so funny when Norm tells it. But apparently Sinbad goes to the store, has some issue with the people working there, and then that night his set is about going sock shopping. Like, he just says what happened to him earlier in the day. And Norman's like, I didn't even really realize you could do that. Like, it kind of like this is where it started to kind of break down in his mind the sort of boundaries he'd put around what his stand-up could be, right? Is like, oh yeah, you could just riff if you're confident enough and you actually have something funny to say. Like, you can just get up there and riff. The next kind of thing that happens with this is Sam Kinison takes him out on tour. Which, two very different energies, I would think. I mean,
different energies, which is great, but same attitude.
Okay.
Which is because Norm is no matter, he's just standing at the mic and delivering, but he is still taking it to you. However, like, Sam is yelling at you. And, but yeah, I think that actually makes a lot of sense to me.
And apparently, I mean, Norm has nothing but praise for Sam Kinison, and Sam wanted to take him out on tour, so he had to like him somewhat. Apparently, this was another sort of learning moment for Norm too, because Sam at one point, again, this is early. Norm's a year in, 2 years in. Sam goes to Norm. He says, "Hey man, you got really good jokes, but do you really give a shit about dogs?" Like, Norm had this like 5-minute dog bit about dogs. Norm is just like Pitbull, yeah. Norm is just like, no, I don't give a shit about. I don't really care about dogs. And Sam basically was telling him, like, listen, just talk about what you're interested in and make that funny. Like, instead of trying to just, whatever's funny, or what you think the audience will think is funny. Think about what you're interested in, and drill down on that. Have jokes about that. And so that was also another kind of eye-opening moment for Norm, because clearly later on in his career, a lot of his subject matter is stuff that is, it's a lot about like death and and like you were saying, your favorite bit is basically this very weird kind of almost deadpan at times thing about what you would do if you killed a woman and buried her, basically, right?
Yeah, well, it's about how you, like, at first it's about how you become obsessed with these women that go missing on TV, and
Right.
you have all these, you listen to, because at first you don't give a shit because you don't know this lady, but then they make you give a shit because they're like, oh, we're talking to Jennifer's best friend or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he goes into the mind of a killer and the shallow graves and all that shit.
It's so good. It's so good. Okay, so all right, and then there's the next big thing, because eventually he comes to America, right? He's going to break onto the American scene. Not quite there yet, but sort of his first thing in America that he does is he goes on Star Search, which is
wow.
It's a pretty funny, like, I'll tell you the one joke that's pretty funny is like he's talking about how his dad caught him smoking, and he was almost a lifelong smoker. He may have quit towards the end, but he smoked starting at 12. He said he started doing it because he wanted to look cool, and the problem was he did look cool when he started smoking. Yep. So anyway, he's got this story about his dad finding him smoking cigarettes, and the old trope is like, if your parents found you smoking cigarettes, they'd make you smoke a whole pack or whatever. Well, his thing is his dad made him smoke a whole cigar, and then he gives it a beat and he goes, so that's when I got into smoking cigars real heavy. It's funny. And then he's got a whole bit about the dating game, how ridiculous the dating game is, and how it's all full of innuendo, and like, if I were a popsicle, what would you do to me? And he just kind of talks through it. And it's pretty funny. It's a little like risque for Star Search, I think. But like, what's funny is the people who are judging him are like Robin Leach and some like fashion designer guy, like all the people, in a soap opera actress, and you're like, none of these people I have laughed at anything, and why are they judging? Why are they judging him? Right?
It's like AGT. It's like it's the same thing now. It's like it's fucking whoever, like Scary Spice and fucking it's like, who? Why are you here?
Right. Yeah. What do you even find? Like, do you like stand up at all? Have you watched?
Right.
Any? Yeah, exactly. So he ends up losing. He doesn't do all that well. And later on, when he's like referencing back to it, and there's a hilarious bit in this book, based on a true story, about this, where he's clearly exaggerating it. But he loses to a guy he's a Nigerian guy who goes by Bushman, and plays up how much of a barefoot guy from the bush that he is.
Sure.
Right? That's the joke.
Okay.
And that's who wins. That's who wins the time that Norm is on Star Search, right?
Where is he now?
Right. I didn't look this up. I was like, what happened to him? And he's still out there, and he's like still talking smack about Norm MacDonald as of like a few years ago.
They still have beef. Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because Norm basically says how unfunny he is, right?
Oh wow.
Bushman was, and Norm is otherwise completely forgotten about him. That's
rent free.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and let's see, in 1988, he actually gets married. Norm MacDonald gets married to this woman, Connie, I might be pronouncing this wrong, Connie Valancourt. Though some sources say her last name was Wayangu. So I don't even know what her name exactly was. I think it's a long
road between those two.
It's two very different names. Yeah, it's two very different names. So I kind of don't believe the second one, but I saw it somewhere.
It sounds like Bushman's wife.
Yeah, right.
I was gonna say, that's why he's so angry.
Right. So she's like, you can't even really find pictures of her. Like, she's not really in the public eye, and she certainly wasn't a public figure of any kind. They would get separated in 1999. I can't really say much about her. I mean, she was she apparently is now like a family therapist in the Los Angeles area, whatever the case. 1992, he has a son named Dylan, named after Dylan Thomas. Apparently, I thought it was going to be a Bob Dylan thing, named after Dylan Thomas because, and this is a little bit of insight into Norm and his family. Named after Dylan Thomas because Norm's father would read him Dylan Thomas's A Child's Christmas in Wales every year at Christmas time. So it was just kind of like a nice little story. There is Norm has funny jokes about his son, though, from time to time. It's clear that he very much loved his son and all of this, but he would definitely use it for humor. So they're like, whenever he was asked publicly how old his son was, he'd be like, he's like 10 or 15 or something. Like, you would never know.
Such an easy dad joke to make if you deliver it. Yeah.
He always would. No,
which one? Who now?
Yeah. Which one? Yeah. So and it changes throughout. It's always like 5 years close to correct. He's like, hey, he's like 5 or 8 or something. I don't know. Yeah. At one point, he's asked what the boy's name is. I think Letterman asks him this, and Norm says, his name's Dagwood, after the great literary figure Dagwood Bumstead. And it's just like ridiculous, stupid jokes. All right, so after Star Search, he's still playing the American clubs. He does do I think he gets on Letterman around this time. He's trying to get on Johnny Carson. I think he gets in on David Letterman in like 1989 or maybe 1990, somewhere around there. And there's a story from, I think it's 1990. There's a story that Marc Maron tells again. Marc Maron, Norm comes to the United States. He's going to perform. He performs on Letterman. He's friends with Carolyn Rea, who's another people our age, we might remember. She was on sitcoms and stuff. She might still be around to some degree, but she was a Canadian.
She's very funny.
Yeah, I've seen stuff of hers. She's very funny. And she's another Canadian. So when Norm came to America, he didn't know any American comics, Canadians helping each other out. He goes on Letterman. Marc Maron tells the story. He was also hanging out with Carolyn, and they go to Norm's hotel room to watch the episode of Letterman. And Norm is just on the hotel bed laying face down while everybody else that's hanging out is watching his performance, right? Just like not gonna watch this at all. And that was his American television debut. And he did well, it was funny, and Letterman loved him. Letterman always loved him from then on. Like, that was always sort of a magical connection, was these two. His next sort of career breaking more into show business was Roseanne invited Norm to come out and write for the Roseanne show.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I don't know about you guys, but we like, when I was a kid, Roseanne was a staple. Like, we 100%. Watched Roseanne. Yeah.
Yep.
So I thought that was pretty interesting that Norm came out and wrote on it. Now, he wasn't the head writer or anything. He's a young guy. And I actually was curious. Like, well, what episodes did he actually contribute to? And I wanted to see if I could find a Norm joke in Roseanne, and I think I might have found one.
Oh, wow. The deep dive. This is why you support the pod. Who else is going back over old episodes of Roseanne with a fine-tooth comb for a Norm MacDonald joke? Brad Kelly.
That's right. All right. So this is an episode. There's 2 episodes that he's got writing credits on. This first one is about DJ. Folks who don't remember, if folks don't know Roseanne, it was kind of I don't know if it was groundbreaking, but for me, growing up very working in like a working class situation, it was very cool to see a sitcom that it wasn't like sophisticated 30 somethings, and it wasn't like a cookie cutter family where everybody was like everybody was on the up and up and everybody was doing the right thing. Roseanne's a very working class family. They're very funny. They're very crass. The heart of the show is that they all really cared about each other, of course, but like Dan drank too much and every once in a while there's a fist fight and these sorts of things, right? Now, DJ, so this episode I'm going to talk about, DJ is the youngest son of Roseanne. He's starting to play hockey. And here's where I think we've got a Norm bit. Roseanne says, to Dan, who's played by John Goodman. Well, Dan, I guess you were just so proud of your son ramming and slamming into people out there that you just couldn't wait to celebrate by giving him his very first sip of beer. DJ just had his first hockey game. Dan had to. The hooker made him nervous. Jackie. Jackie says,
that's Norm.
That's gotta be Norm.
He wanted to say horror, probably.
Yeah, he wanted to say crack horror, honestly.
Jackie says, "Oh, come on, Roseanne, you gave me my first sip of beer." Roseanne says, "That was different. I was drunk." So I think that's some Norm humor getting in there, right? Here's another one. This is from a different episode. Dan has lost his job and he has to go in for a job interview. And I think this is a Norm bit too. So this is Dan. He's retelling Roseanne at the end of the day how this job interview went. "I can't do interviews. I get too nervous. The guy asked me if I had any hobbies. I panicked and said drinking." Yeah. So I think that's probably a Norm joke, right?
Yeah, that sounds like Norm.
Okay, so he's at Roseanne for like 2 seasons, and then Saturday Night Live calls. He's still contractually obligated to work on the Roseanne show, but Roseanne gives him the blessing, says, this is your big break because probably you might end up on screen. You're not, there's not really a place for you in Roseanne to be on the television show. They did bring Norm back when they did Roseanne later, like in 2018 or whatever. They brought Norm back to consult on stories. So that relationship was always good. Now Norm he has funny descriptions for what happened in this whole hiring process, and I don't know if it's true. The one thing is he claims he moved his entire life to New York, and then when he got there he found out that he had an audition. Now I don't know if that's actually true or not. In the book, based on a true story, he says that he got in with a meeting with Lorne Michaels to do this audition, and Lorne Michaels asked him to do an impression or something. And Norm MacDonald, who in the book, again, not true, but based on a true story, Norm is a morphine addict. And he gets the job at SNL by giving Lorne Michaels a packet of morphine. That's how he gets the gig on Saturday.
I like that story. I like that story better.
It's so funny. Yeah, he describes Lorne Michaels. He says, "Luckily, Lorne Michaels was a hopeless morphine addict." Yeah.
It's so funny. As if Lorne Michaels couldn't get his own morphine.
Yeah.
Like well into the 90s now. He's made every major career in comedy for a decade. But I brought him some. Yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah, it's really good. So we got to talk about SNL a little bit. And this is, I feel like, a good opportunity because everybody knows Saturday Night Live. It's had its ups and downs. I haven't really seen much of it in the last decade. I'm sure they have funny sketches from time to time. I think everybody probably has a slightly different opinion about what the peak of Saturday Night Live was, but I think it's a reasonable candidate is right after Norm shows up. So he comes on, he gets the call for the season ending in 1993. Sorry, for the season that starts in 1993. So fall of 1993. The season right before his remains the highest ratings that SNL has ever had, right? So this is, in terms of ratings and viewership, Norm is hitting it right at its peak, basically. Dana Carvey left the year before, right? Which was, if people have been watching, people of our age, Dana Carvey, we all know who he is, for sure. Chris Rock had been there the year before. Let's see. Some cast members that were kind of promoted up to repertory parts were Tim Meadows and Adam Sandler and David Spade. They'd been there for a little bit, but just before him, and they were really starting to get their play. And then also Jay Moore and Sarah Silverman joined the same year as him. They were doing a thing. They were doing a thing where they were bringing in a lot of stand-ups, which they hadn't really done before. It had almost been exclusively comic actors before this, and they were going to try stand-ups. What's funny about that is, like, and Norm talks about this too, is like none of us could act. Like we were funny, like talking into a microphone. Yeah.
That's goes way beyond acting. regular acting as well. It's
Yeah.
live. You're writing the skits up until you do them. I mean, it's like a combination of acting and improv, and it's crazy. It's the heat has to be nuts.
Which I kind of think, honestly, I mean, you know, Norm probably played it down. However, stand up is all of that. Because I mean, if you're performing, it is improv. You're riffing. I mean, the situations you perform in are nightmares a lot of the time. So it's if you're not in the room, if you're not present, you're trying to remember what you wrote. And you have to act out some things a lot. You know what I mean? Even if it's just a facial expression or a tonal thing.
That's true.
Yeah, I think Norm probably played it down a little bit, but I do think he had the chops. I mean, his show was great. So
he ended up doing just fine. I mean, he would always say that he can't act, and you know, I mean, I guess from a certain perspective, he didn't maybe have the range of I don't know, pick somebody, but he could certainly
even
Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
I mean, even Sandler, like it's like he's an act, like he can act, like it's he can do both. But I mean, he was always Norm as the character of himself.
right. And the people that he could do impressions of were really just like tweaks on Norm, right? So like Bob Dole, like and Larry King, you can sort of they're sort of offshoots of Norm's personality in a way anyway. So another thing, this is also the first season, just kind of pinpointing us in time, who else is on the show, who else he's working with. Norm's first season is Phil Hartman's last season on Saturday Night Live. Rob Schneider is around. You got Chris Farley at like the height of his Saturday Night Live powers. And Kevin Nealon is the guy who's actually doing Weekend Update when Norm shows up. There's Norm's first bit is in the sketch. He's an irate caterer at Shannon Doherty's wedding video. It's not really much to it. But Shannon Doherty was like sort of famous for being sort of like brash and fist fights all the time, and so
what a fucking flimsy premise.
Right. No, it's terrible. It was pretty terrible. I did watch it and I was like, it's really not that funny. But he's I think like the next week or something, comes on as a guest on Kevin Nealon's Weekend Update, and it's probably this appearance that got them thinking that he should probably take over. And I just want to read this bit from him because it's pretty funny. You know, I've always been afraid of going to prison. This is him being interviewed on Weekend Update. I was thinking about it the other day, and I realized that what scares me most about going to prison isn't the loss of freedom or stigma or even separation from family. To me, the scariest thing about going to prison is the anal rape. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah, that tracks. It sounds like that Norm joke, right? For people who haven't seen it, he's got some classic Saturday Night Live stuff. Him doing Burt Reynolds on Celebrity SNL is hilarious. Turd Ferguson. I don't even know that it's a good Burt Reynolds impersonation. It doesn't matter. It's its whole, like, Turd Ferguson is sort of the character. It's his whole own thing, and it's freaking great. Like I said, Larry King and Bob Dole. But mostly he's doing the Weekend Update. That's really his thing. And it's great because it's every week he's on camera. He's mostly writing these bits with Jim Downey, a guy who never really appears on screen, but is another great comedy writer. I didn't even know. I wasn't sure how to talk about this because there's some bits that I think are funny, and I was trying to like pick stuff that was like representative. One of my favorite ones, and I don't want to get into a mode where I'm trying to do Norm MacDonald bits because I can't. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of just like,
he could make a word funny, and he found punchlines inside jokes.
Right. So he has this great one. This one is so funny to me, and I think it can do it without doing exactly the voice, and it's still funny. He has a pie chart that shows major accidents. It basically shows that like most minor car accidents are women and most major car accidents are men, right? he's like playing on the getting the boos and the hisses from people who think this is sexist or whatever. And he says like, you might notice that the charts don't add up to 100. That's because the math was done by a woman. And boo hiss, right? And then he says, but that joke was also written by a woman, right? It's like, now you don't know what to think. And then he lets a beat go and he says, "I'm just kidding. We don't hire women." And it's just like, yeah.
Well, he could make a joke that wasn't even good, funny by just doing that. Like, it's like that's that first joke is fine, but he was like, well, that's just the setup. To these next two lines of I know exactly. I mean, it's just manipulation. It's manipulating the audience to be like, I know how you're going to react, and this is what I'm going to say.
Right. No, it's like a 4 point. It's like a
rolling punchline. It's like a flywheel generator of laughs where you're not just going to get one.
It's brilliant. Great. I mean, you don't need to break it down too much, but you can see how he's positioning you, moving you from one position to the next, right? And saying I'm just joking, we don't hire women by itself isn't funny at all, really. Like, I'm not even saying that I'm like being offended. It's just not. It's not funny. But like after those 2 or 3 things, it does actually land hilariously. We're going to talk a little bit about the big thing about Weekend Update, which is the OJ Simpson stuff, but I just want to hit a couple other things that he would talk about. One, as I listened back, cracked me up, was that he had this joke about Bill Clinton. Anytime Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton was president at this time, right? Anytime Bill Clinton ran into like a conflict of some kind, Norm would joke that he jumped on a plane to England, lit up a big fat joint and jumped on a plane to England. Right? So like every time Bill Clinton had a problem, and then he lit up a fat joint and jumped on a plane to England.
Dude, this is something I don't think people talk about enough, and I think it was actually during SNL. It was maybe before he got fired. But he did the White House Correspondents' Dinner for Clinton.
Yep.
Oh. And that is one of the most amazing 20 minutes because he is bombing and then he's destroyed. Like, he just powers through and just ends up crushing. It's so, it's so good.
And it's I watched that again too, and it's one of the few times you see him on camera where he does actually seem to be nervous. I'm sure he's been nervous, like, but hiding it. And in this one, you can tell, like, he does not comfortable.
These are the eyes wide shut people. So he's right. He's right to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
He does have a great joke on that. He goes because I guess Clinton had like he broke his ankle or something, and he goes. Yeah, I just sort of realized this, but you're handicapped and you're the president. I bet you have an amazing parking spot.
Right. That's right. Now, Weekend Update, Correspondents' Dinner is a little bit of controversy, but that was kind of okay because the point is they're all making fun of each other. It's kind of like a roast sort of. So that's cool. You can kind of get out of there unscathed ultimately. But Weekend Update, he ended up in a bunch of controversy. Ultimately, the OJ Simpson stuff, but there's a couple other ones I want to hit. So one of them is, so while during Norm's reign and Weekend Update, Marlon Brando, who we've covered on the show, had this anti-Semitism controversy. Marlon Brando said some ridiculous thing about how the Jews control the media. And he had to apologize.
Say it again for YouTube.
No. Hey, this is Marlon Brando says this.
Right? Well, Marlon Brando said this. Okay, yeah. And of course, go back and listen to our Marlon Brando episode. Marlon was almost practically adopted by Jews in New York City early in his career. So it's sort of probably much ado about nothing.
I think it ultimately was. Now here's the joke, because Marlon Brando, he went and met with some leaders of the Jewish community and sort of, to talk with them and whatever. And this is Norm's joke about this. After meeting with Jewish leaders and apologizing, they issued a press release stating that Marlon Brando is now free to work again.
Nothing changes. Nothing changes.
Yeah,
That's the same joke that everybody's making now with Kanye and everything.
Yeah.
It is. That's why I thought it was funny. I was like, man, that's 30 plus years ago. Yeah.
Yep,
or 30-ish years ago at least. All right. So here's another bit of controversy that he ended up with. Okay, there was a story. I'll just read this is the quote this is what Norm said on Weekend Update. It's about this news story. And finally, in Falls City, Nebraska, John Lauder has been sentenced to death for attempting to kill 3 people in what prosecutors call a plot to silence a cross-dressing female who had accused him of rape. Now, this might strike some viewers as harsh, but I believe everyone involved in this story should die.
Damn.
That's fucking wild.
So I'm just laughing at it's kind of made me tense just to read that. Now what's hilarious, what cracks me up about this is this next bit in and I just pasted the Wikipedia in here because it cracks me up. This is from Wikipedia. The comments were met with sharp criticism from trans and queer communities and organizations, including the Transsexual Menace, which apparently was like a group that called itself the Transsexual Menace. And I wanted to find somewhere that sounded like a thing that Norm would say.
Yeah, that sounds like,
right?
Yeah.
It sounds like a one-phrase Norm MacDonald joke somehow, but I never found any place where he actually said it. So anyway, they're coming after. He was taking heat fairly early on in the Weekend Update stuff, and not afraid of it.
That is a hot seat to be in on SNL because during
that time, I mean, like that is everybody watched it, so it was like you were going to watch Norm. He's especially after the first controversy. It's like, well, now what the fuck is he going to say this week?
Right.
You know, it's like, people were, it's like watching Chappelle now, where you're like, okay, what's he going to do? And they were like, what is it going to be this time? You know, where people are tuning in. I mean, for that,
they should give Ye Weekend Update.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
You can imagine.
Oh man,
he just keeps doing prop comedy.
And Carrot Top can get together.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk about the OJ stuff because that's the big chunk. But I do want to point something else out here about the Weekend Update. Norm in later years would refer to a joke that they told on Weekend Update, which he said was the closest he ever got in an attempt to write what he referred to as the perfect joke. All right. Now, his joke is basically where the punchline and the setup are the same thing. And I may not make exact sense right now, but here was the closest he says he ever got, and it was on Weekend Update. And he's talking to Mark Maron in the Mark Maron podcast years later about this. He says, and then we did one joke that was pretty close, not perfect. It was this. Lyle Lovett and Julia Roberts are getting a divorce, and people close to the couple say the reason is because he's Lyle Lovett and she's Julia Roberts. And so to him, this is like the holy grail of a joke. It's somehow that it's almost not a joke. It's like it's the punchline and the setup are the same statement, right? That's what he said he was often looking for.
It's like a tautological joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting. I thought that was pretty interesting because it's kind of a funny joke, but it's not the funniest thing he ever said by any means.
But it's like there's no work in it because it's just the thing is it's like the thing is the thing.
It's almost like it's almost like just pointing at something. It's just sort of
right.
like
Where that's the
that's it. Yeah. So now Weekend Update, he gets pretty famous because Blake, like you were saying, everybody is watching him. I mean, millions of people are watching him every week for however long, and Weekend Update is on every episode of Saturday Night Live, right? He gets recognized on the street, he's getting recognized on the street and that sort of thing. And this is where things kind of start to get a little bit weird. Not weird. This is where something really comes into his life that wasn't a huge factor before. And this is gambling. All right. So it's difficult to track down sort of exactly where it began and where it ended, if it ever ended, and at what point he was how deep into it. But he would refer to him later on, and it wasn't a joke, as a degenerate gambler. He sought psychotherapy to get help with it. It probably factored into his divorce. I mean, I'm just speculating, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Now, he would talk about how the best thing to bet on was baseball. He said if you really paid attention and really studied and really tried, you could actually successfully and reliably handicap baseball, supposedly. Now, this sounds like something a lot of gamblers would say. Oh, I figured out the exact system, right?
Thank God he didn't live long enough to get into crypto.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say.
For real. Jesus Christ.
Can you imagine Norm making calls on dog coins?
Right. Oh my God. Some other betting tips from Norm. He said the worst thing to bet on is football because, quote, the ball ain't round. Right. So I just think that's kind of funny. And he would give it in this kind of old timey voice, right? He was apparently a quite a good card player. He would eventually, this is much later, 2007 or something, he would host a season of World Series of Poker on TV. And at one point he competed in like one of these televised poker tournaments and ended up, out of 800 and some odd people, ended up in the top 100 or top 50 and won like $20,000 some dollars. Right? So he was pretty good at poker. Bet mostly on sports though. He apparently, and this is after Weekend Update starts, he apparently loses all of his money on 3 different occasions.
What?
Yeah. Artie Lang talks about this a lot because he was also part of it, and they would do like these thing called lightning bets, which Artie says is like heroin for a fucking gambling addict, because like eventually like you bet the line, but then once you break that, like every point scored is like $1,000. So it's like you're just over and over. So every 3-pointer, you're like, oh my God, that's $3,000. Every 2 points, it's like crazy. So it's I guess like at one point like he won like $50,000 one night. This is like a folklore, nobody's sure if it's true or not. And then he went and threw it into the Atlantic Ocean because he's like, I'm just gonna gamble it away.
It was in Atlantic City. He says this happened, and he does not seem to be joking. It's like, he just went through 50, or he said $60,000.
Yeah, something around there.
Yep. Atlantic City is a coalescence of despair. That can terrible things. There is something dark in Atlantic City. Stay away. Get out before sunset. That's all I'm gonna say.
Here's something else. So apparently the most he ever lost at once was $400,000, and this was on a football game. The Atlanta Falcons beat the Denver Broncos. I did some research. I think that was actually the Super Bowl in 1999. He said that was basically all the money he had left. Now we're not quite done talking about SNL, but 1999, he's not on Saturday Night Live anymore. Right. So this is like he basically completely goes dead broke after Saturday Night Live. There's another interesting thing, and this is later. This is talking about gambling. MacDonald said in a 2018 interview that prior to the ruling United States versus Scheinberg, which was in 2011, he would play up to 20 online limit hold'em games at once. Since they went offline, it kind of saved my life because I was just grinding out and couldn't sleep. Right. So, you see, he literally, I mean, they paid his rule that made online poker illegal. And this is like,
well, now look at us. What do you have any insight or ideas about what it was in his personality? Was he just, some people are wired, I guess, for different kinds of addiction, but that's heavy.
He would occasionally talk about it. I mean, I don't think it's all that different. I mean, if you look at his comedy style, the style is pushing all the chips onto this thing that you have faith in, right? And it might not work. Like, it's not a sure thing necessarily. And so I think it's I think for him, there's something about that long shot. There's something about the thing that's the outside chance, but if it lands, it's way better than going the easy route, right? It's way better than the sure thing that'll get a chuckle, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
well, he's
yeah.
He's not a single hitter. He's a home run hitter. You know what I mean? It's either a home run or you strike out.
Right.
So that's basically Norm's whole thing.
Yeah.
He's
so
the big bomber of comedy.
Right.
Yeah.
Multiple things.
Right.
Second gambling addict that we've covered so far. I think he might be number 40. We're around 39, 40 right now. So
right. Francis Bacon, right, had a gambling
Francis
thing,
Bacon,
right?
the great British painter, had a huge gambling problem.
Yeah.
He ended up making so much money that it didn't matter, but it
right.
really messed him up for a while there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the thing with Norman. Like I said, 2011. I mean, he's gambling online poker in what he would refer to as a degenerate manner. So I don't know that he ever really stopped. And in fact, there's a thing on the last special, that Netflix special he put out that was recorded without even an audience because there wasn't time. There's a sort of a round table with Dave Chappelle and David Letterman and Adam Sandler and David Spade and Conan and Molly Shannon. And David Letterman just asks the group, was he still gambling? And Sandler and Spade, who were relatively close to him, said they weren't sure. He might have been. So he could have been gambling. He might have. I don't know that he ever really quit. I mean, he probably had times where he was doing it more and less, but I don't think that he ever really quit.
It was like, I think it was like smoking cigs to him too. You know what I mean? It's the same compulsion. It's like he would do it for a while. I mean, like he was on, I think Rogan told the story, but he was on a plane with Rogan and he goes, the whole time he's just talking about he quit smoking, and then he gets off the plane, goes into the convenience store, buys a pack of cigarettes, lights one in the thing, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't know, I started again."
Right? Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I never had a thing for gambling, so it always strikes me as weird. But I've had stuff for other things, and yeah. I mean, something gets its hooks in you, man. It's not easy to Yeah, and Norm, he didn't have to work a normal job. He didn't have school nights. He didn't, he wasn't married. He could kind of get away with it to a certain degree.
Imagine being. Go on.
Nobody was there to check. Nobody was there to check him.
Right.
But what are you going to say? Sorry.
No. I was just going to say, imagine being Norm MacDonald. How old is he now? I mean, we're getting into the aughts, right?
I mean, I kind of fast forwarded to talk the gambling stuff, but when he hits on Saturday Night Live, he would have been 20. He would have been like 28, 29.
Yeah, with that kind of money, you don't have a family kind of holding you down. I mean, I could imagine. Fuck it, let's go to Vegas. Let's go to Atlantic City. Let's just stay in the casinos. I mean, those places they're fun. Yeah. It's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry. And when he's on SNL, he was in his mid-30s. I did the math wrong.
But anyway, it's still young. Yeah.
Young,
you're a man. You're famous. You've got hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can go back to the ATM machine anytime you want, and you're in Atlantic City, and it's Friday night. Fuck it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably having a few pops too, I bet.
Yeah. What's funny is he wasn't, I mean, we'll talk about this more later. He wasn't like a materialist guy either. Like, it's not like the money wasn't so he would then go spend it on a bunch of stuff. It seemed to be like the thing itself, if that makes sense. Like the actual rush of winning, of taking the risk and winning or losing, right? That endorphin roller coaster.
Well, yeah, they say this, the gambling addict loves losing. Like on some level, they're there to lose too. You have to be, otherwise you just stop going.
Yeah. Well, he said the most painful part is once you notice that it's ending. Between when you notice it's turning on you, like in an individual bet, say a game starts to not go well, that like you're just like, I just want it to be over. Like I want all the money to be gone. Right. And this is sort of like the thing. Sometimes this is how he says you end up spending till you're broke, because if you had $500,000 and you lost 450, that last 50, it's like, just get rid of all of it. Just take me to the bottom.
Win it back on one trade.
Right.
Well, it's also like just like lose it. Yeah. Fuck, that 50,000 is just laughing at you. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it's almost taunting you to be like, all right, fuck it.
Just do it. Yeah, just get rid of all of it.
All on zero at roulette. Let's go.
Right.
Just walk out 100%.
Yeah. All right. We're going to talk about a feud that he had on Saturday Night Live, and then we're going to talk about the OJ Simpson stuff. Okay. So the biggest feud, because he had made good friends on Saturday Night Live, Adam Sandler, who would help him out in his career quite a bit, lifelong friends with David Spade. He was friends with Rob Schneider. He thought Chris Farley was basically the funniest person who ever walked the earth. And yet he didn't get along with everybody. Right. And the one guy he got along with the least, it was Chris Kattan. I don't know if you guys remember Chris Kattan.
Yeah.
Chris Kattan played Corky Romano, and he was Knight of the Roxbury. He played Mango, which I remember was just like this little feral guy who ate fruit really weirdly and was always trying to hump people.
Oh, I looked the guy up. Okay.
Yeah,
I could see these two just in terms of physiognomy that they're just fire and ice somehow.
Yeah. Now, here, the thing about Chris Kattan, excuse me, the thing about Chris Kattan that bothered Norm MacDonald is everybody thought Chris Kattan was a gay guy. And yet Chris Kattan was constantly talking about women, and he would egregiously flirt with any women that came on the set. You know what I mean? Like, he would constantly throw it at him, and he just drove Norm MacDonald nuts. And this is the thing. I love Norm. Hilarious. He had a bit of a mean streak to him at times, right? I think if you were on his side, he was your best friend. But if he found that he didn't like he has that kind of wit that can just level somebody, right? If he wants to. And there's this great anecdote that Jim Breuer, who was also on SNL at this time, Jim Breuer tells this great anecdote about when Pamela Anderson came on Saturday Night Live, right? And so Chris Kattan is constantly horned up and talking to her and oh, we can make out, we can come to the after party and get right. Chris Kattan is being very gross about it the whole week. And there's supposed to be in Kattan, anytime a woman would come on as the host, he would write a sketch in which he would get to make out with whoever the host was, right? That was the sketch that he would write. Yeah. So anyway, there's a sketch coming on, and it's going to be the Twilight Zone sketch. And Norm MacDonald is going to be Rod Serling, who we've also covered on the show. And which is perfect because you can play that straight man kind of thing, right? Big prominent voice. Now the sketch is, if people remember Twilight Zone, there was an episode of the Twilight Zone where everybody's pig-faced, and then there's this one woman who's in bandages, and they pull it off, and she's a normal looking woman, and everybody's aghast at her because it's the pig face society, right? So a normal looking human being is disgusting to him. It's that ironic twist. Now, the joke is obviously Pamela Anderson is the woman, and when they take the thing off, all of the male pig-faced guys are like, "Oh, she's hot." It's like an opposite of the twist, right? But anyway, the point is, while they're doing dress rehearsals, and you do dress and then you do live, right? So you do dress, and that's to kind of shake anything out and make sure the sketch works. You might actually use that if, say, something in the live show kind of doesn't work for whatever reason. You might splice that in. So they do dress and they do rehearsal. In dress, Norm doesn't do the Rod Serling voice. He just does his normal voice. And this is driving Chris Kattan crazy, right? Just driving him nuts. And he's getting all charged up, and he's like, "Norm, you're so unprofessional. I can't believe," and Norm is the biggest star of SNL at this time. So Chris Kattan's very upset with him, calling him unprofessional, all this. Meanwhile, he keeps hitting on Pamela Anderson in a very gross way. Okay. Cut to the next day. They're doing the live taping. And again, counting down, Chris Kattan keeps jabbing at Norm MacDonald about, "Oh, I can't believe you're not gonna do the voice. It's so unprofessional." He's also hitting on Pamela Anderson. And then 15 seconds to them hitting the cameras, Norm MacDonald basically turns to Chris Kattan. Remember, 15 seconds, and then they're going to be live on the air. Norm MacDonald turns to Chris Kattan, and he basically says, I want to quote, this is what Jim Breuer says he said, so it's not exactly right, but this is basically what Norm says. With 15 seconds to air, says it right to Chris Kattan. "Hey, everyone, in case you didn't know, Kattan is gay, even though he doesn't say he's gay. And that's why he's an angry little bitch and takes it out on everyone. And he tries to hit on Pamela Anderson and everyone else. So why don't you just come out of the closet instead of living a lie, you little bitch?" Boom. Live. He goes right into the Rod Serling impression. Perfect. Nails it. Right? And Chris Kattan is now had been punched in the nuts basically, and is now on live TV for millions of people, and has to hold his frame. Yeah. Really, really, really funny.
That fucking rocks. He rocks, dude.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, okay, one more thing, and then we're going to talk about OJ. I forgot how much stuff happens in the 90s. The 90s is where a lot of the good bio stuff happens, because this is like the height of his fame for the general public. In 1997, he gets invited to family night at the Hansher Auditorium at the University of Iowa. And this is a famous night in stand-up comedy. Daryl Hammond and Jim Brewer are opening for him. Family night at the Hansher Auditorium, University of Iowa. It's a fundraiser for the University of Iowa athletic department. Family night. Right. Okay. Jim Brewer goes on, fine, normal. Daryl Hammond goes on, fine, normal. They're doing great. They're killing it, but everyone's waiting for Norm MacDonald. Norm MacDonald comes out. He's been instructed not to swear. It's family night at the University of Iowa. There are not only college kids, but there's their parents. There's little brothers and sisters. There's a bunch of children. There's about 2,000 people in the auditorium. Go ahead.
Beautiful campus. Iowa City's it's beautiful. Yeah.
Now, according to, there's different reports on what Norm's first joke was, but what Jim Brewer says is this is the first joke. First thing he says when he gets out on stage. Now, if you're a gay guy, would you rather be the ass guy or the dick guy? Because, I mean, what's the benefit of being the ass guy, right? And just goes
family night. The hot guys.
Yeah. And they start leaving in droves, right? He says the estimates are by the time Norm MacDonald was done, they'd started with 2,000 people in the audience. There were 200 people left by the end of Norm MacDonald's set.
Walked over 1,000 people.
Walked, yeah, like 1,800 people apparently he walked.
Holy
and the only people left were like the hardcore college kids who thought it was hilarious that he was doing this, right?
Wow.
He gets disinvited. From the next day's golf event or whatever, right? And then apparently, I wanted to find the specific text of this and I couldn't. He refers to it as, or Jim Brewer refers to it as, getting kicked out of the state of Iowa by the governor. So there was like a write-up basically asking Norm MacDonald to leave the state after this.
Dude, so there was a comic that was there that night. He's a very funny comedian. I cannot remember his name right now, but he just did a podcast with Segura, and his version of it is that he was there with his mom and the family, because it was fucking family night.
Right.
And his report is that he went up there and he was talking about, when you're jerking off and it's like that was the first thing out of his mouth. You're jerking off, you do this and do that.
Yeah.
And he will just start, and he's like crying. Like this kid is not a comic yet, but he's going to be. Is crying, and his mom leaves, and it's just him and his boys. And then he gets kicked out of Iowa, and they still talk about it.
They had like a 20th anniversary write-up in like the student newspaper or something. Yeah. It's like they refer to it. It's like if the campus burned down or something. That's how they.
Well, it's like Ozzy peeing outside of the Alamo or something. You know what I mean? Like where it's like that level of disrespect, I guess, that they felt.
Yeah, they wanted him to work clean for family night, and he wasn't having it. Maybe he'd had a bad gambling beat.
Oh, that's possible. Yeah. I think he was screwing with them because he would later say, he was like, "Oh, I would never swear like that if I knew there were children around." He would also say stuff like, I'm there working for whoever owns the cameras, so I try to do what they ask of me.
It's just don't. It's I think that part is a lie. I think it is, don't tell him to do something, he will do the opposite. I mean, it's just like, stop doing OJ jokes.
Right.
I'll do a whole 10 minutes on OJ.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving into that, we're going to talk about the OJ part, because this part is great. And it's also like, I mean, so he goes hard on OJ. And as I'm thinking back to this, like, I mean, I don't know how well you guys remember that case going on and how much it was in the news. Like, I mean, there had never been anything like it. I don't think there's been anything since, really. Yeah. It was a moment for sure. We watched it. It didn't seem strange at the time, but it seems strange now. I mean, I was in 7th grade, I think. The teacher in my history class turned the TV on for the verdict. Like, it was very.
They put it on in the lunchroom in my junior high as a big moment. They put the verdict on. It was some kind of thing. How crazy is that? I mean, how insane were these adults?
Yeah, isn't it crazy?
I found this is something kind of funny, Blake. I found out, to just to give you the kind of idea of the childhood I had. I was poking around my hometown recently, on like Google Maps or whatever. I was thinking of maybe take a trip out there or whatever. The school that I went to, elementary school and then junior high, has since been converted into low income housing. And I don't want to detract from the episode, but I could get pictures. I could see my old locker. It's just Dickensian. What a nightmare. I knew it was a dump.
Right. But this is what was so weird about, like, okay, so you watched it in school. Why was it such a big deal?
Hysteria, mania, media, hyper-sensationalism, brainwashing. He was a football player. He carried the ball. He carried the ball that wasn't round. He was the hero to that generation. And so it was a media event. In a way, we were getting like a little cultural studies moment, like a media studies, but
it was crazy. And so at Norm said Weekend Update had something, especially when the trial itself was going on, they had something about it basically every week. And I don't know now, it's sort of like, was that contributing to the overall like attention on it, or was it following it? You know what I mean? It's kind of,
did they coincide? Yeah, go ahead, Blake.
I was going to say, I think it was also like court TV, like wasn't it one of the first ones that was like really put on every day? Like maybe the Menendez brothers was like the first
might
one.
Have been,
but after that, and then but the Menendez brothers weren't famous already,
right?
You know what I mean? OJ was he was a movie star. He was a movie star too. Yep. I mean, he was fucking everything. He was like an all-American kind of guy. And then the chase, I think, contributed to it.
Oh yeah, there was so much. Well, and then the race stuff. It was kind of coming on the tail end of the LA riots too.
It's when cable news had really kicked off as well. The 24/7 news cycle, and everybody has cable in their homes now. And So this whole thing factors in huge into Norm's career, right? And also to his. He was saying some of the funniest stuff about the trial that anyone was saying was coming out of Norm's mouth. And I got a couple of the jokes because they're pretty hilarious. And for folks who are maybe younger and like missed the whole OJ thing, I hope these are still funny. But here's one. It has been revealed today that OJ Simpson told police that Nicole Brown Simpson used to beat him up. He also told police that she and Ron Goldman killed him.
That's a great fucking joke.
For the Zoomers out there, OJ Simpson killed his wife.
Right. She killed,
let's cut to the chase.
And Ron Goldman and Ron Goldman, who Norm MacDonald would constantly refer to as a waiter. Yeah. He was a waiter. It was revealed. There's another one. It was revealed this week that defense lawyer Johnny Cochran once abused his first wife. In his defense, Cochran said, "Hey, at least I didn't kill her like some people I know." Here's another one. Was O.J. Simpson high on speed the night of the murders? Absolutely not, said defense attorney Johnny Cochran. A simple test of any of O.J.'s blood found at the crime scene will prove it. This was part of the joke too, is like the physical evidence was like overwhelming that OJ Simpson did it, and like they constantly had reasons why. Here's another one. F. Lee Bailey who's another attorney for OJ. F. Lee Bailey said this week that if the defense only knew what Ron Goldman's last words were, they would see the truth of the case. My guess is that Ron Goldman's last words were, "Hey, you're OJ."
Oh man.
We're do two more. Dismissed Simpson juror Jeanette Harris revealed in interviews this week that the jury is torn by dissension. It is already divided into two camps: those who think he is guilty and those who are really, really stupid. There's another good one. Remember 12 Angry Men, the famous courtroom drama? Well, the first film about O.J. Simpson case is in the works. It is entitled 9 Angry Black People, 2 Scared Asians, and a White Guy Who Hasn't Spoken Since Rosa Lopez.
Oh.
Rosa Lopez was like one of the first witnesses. Yeah. Well, here's another one. Well, the trial of the century is over. Late yesterday, the fate of O.J. Simpson, the most famed murder suspect in American history, was placed in the hands of the jurors. They must now decide whether to free him or to get all their heads cut off. And here is the big one. It's official. Murder is legal in the state of California.
Jesus Christ.
That goes so hard. That's not even funny. Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
No, it's really not. But it is actually, if you think about it, it's kind of close to that Lyle Lovett joke. It's like, it's just the one observation in and of itself. Yeah. So people loved this mostly, right? This is something people were constantly coming back to. I remember some of these jokes from back then. I feel like at that time I watched Saturday Night Live like on Comedy Central, like later. I don't know. I really watched it when it was on. Yeah.
In the daytime. They played it was stand up until God, I'm a fucking dork. It was stand up.
I'm with you. I watched it all the time.
1:00, and then they would play 2 90s SNL episodes, and then they put like Kids in the Hall, and then something else, and then like Daily Show.
People, the youngins, they'll never appreciate Comedy Central in the 90s.
Oh, so good. It was so good.
Mystery Science Theater 3000. That was my jam.
Yeah. It
still
so
is.
good.
Love that show.
Yeah. Okay. So man. Yeah, that's all we watched. I mean, I watched that more than MTV, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So okay. So trial ends October 1995, right? Norm continues on to be the host of Weekend Update until December of 1997. See, my memory, he'd been fired like almost right after this, but apparently he goes on for a while. At that point, December of 1997, the president of NBC's West Coast division, this guy, Don Ohlmeyer, basically pressures Norm into being fired. And it turns out that old Don Ohlmeyer was good friends with O.J. Simpson. He golfed with O.J. Simpson. According to Jim Downey, one of the comedy writers of Weekend Update, Don Ohlmeyer threw a party for the jurors who dismissed O.J. Right? So
Jesus, fuck.
Right. Yeah. So now, according to Norm, Don Ohlmeyer said that Norm was fired because he wasn't funny. Right. Norm has a great joke about this. Really, was like, fired is one thing, but it's like then he told me I wasn't funny. And I was like, oh, that's much worse. I don't have anything to fall back on. Yeah.
He's like, oh, that's bad news. And he goes, yeah, you're not funny. He's like, oh my God, that's even worse news. He had a great, amazing joke because they asked him because he got fired, and then a year later he came back to host. Yep. And they were like, yeah, they fired me because I'm not funny. So either I got funny or this show sucks.
Yeah, no, I actually got a bit of that. Yeah, he comes back in here. Let me just read this a little bit after this. How did I suddenly get so damn funny? This is from the Saturday Night Live monologue. It is inexplicable to me because a year and a half, let's face it, that's not enough time for a dude to get funny. And then it occurred to me, I haven't gotten funnier. The show has gotten really bad. So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. Okay, so let's recap. The bad news is I'm still not funny. The good news is the show blows. All right, we got a bad show for you. Dr. Dre, Snoop Doggy Dogg, Eminem is here. We'll be right back. Yeah, wow. That was one of the great monologues of all time.
All meta and twisted up.
Oh yeah.
And then,
hilarious.
And him going on Letterman and like not dogging on Don Ohlmeyer is so funny. He's like, he's a good man. He's a good guy.
Yeah, and Letterman is pounding on Ohlmeyer, and Norm's just like, whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Which was in hindsight probably the right move, right? Even if he was super mad at him. Yeah, that was the move to play for sure. Because then he comes out of it looking much better. The next thing that happens, the next thing that comes out after Saturday Night Live, the next big thing is Dirty Work. Dirty Work. This is basically Norm MacDonald ends up being in a bunch of movies and small parts and voiceover and stuff like that. This is the only Norm MacDonald movie. This is the only movie where he's a lead actor. And basically, if you haven't seen it, Norm MacDonald plays this guy. He's kind of down on his luck guy who starts a revenge for hire business with his friend, and you find out later his brother, Artie Lang. And it's I was looking up a little bit about the reviews of it because I was just curious, like, how was it perceived sort of at its time? It has a 14% rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oof.
Yeah, people fucking hated it when it came out, and now it's like revered.
It's a cult hit. I mean,
it's hilarious. It's one of those comedies you put on, you go, how did this ever get made? Yeah. Could anything like this ever be made again? What happened?
Yeah, let me tell you some of the people who are in it too, just because it's pretty good. Norm MacDonald, obviously, Artie Lang, this guy Jack Warden, who if that name doesn't ring a bell and you saw him, you would remember. He's the old man. He plays Pop. Chris Farley, Chevy Chase, this is Chris Farley and Chevy Chase, two of their better. I don't know if it's their better roles, but they play great roles. I mean, Chris Farley's got half his nose bitten off by a Saigon whore, and he's just completely out of control. Chevy Chase is a doctor who is basically in deep with the bookies. So every scene you see him show up in, he's got like a different injury. You know, it's like they cut a toe off, or they broke his arm or something. Got thrown out of a moving car. And there's a bunch. I mean, actually, I was surprised to see this, but like John Goodman's in it, Adam Sandler is in it, which I forgot. Gary Coleman's in it. Dave Ketchner's in it. Who else? Those are probably the names that people would remember.
Bob Saget directed this thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's based on a Roald Dahl short story.
Yeah, I mean, very
like in a loose way, but that's, I mean, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. I mean, Bob Saget at this time had only directed one other thing. This is this made for TV movie called I can't remember the name of it. It was basically Bob Saget had a sister who had this very rare disease called scleroderma. And they made this TV movie sort of to bring attention to her life and to scleroderma, and that was the only thing Bob Saget had ever directed before Dirty Work. But Bob Saget and Norm MacDonald go way back. Norm MacDonald met Bob at Yuck Yucks, I believe it was Yuck Yucks in Ottawa, when Norm was 14 years old. So he was like the first comedian that Norm ever met was Bob Saget, and then their careers kind of came back together right as they both. And Bob Saget was a young man then too. He's only a few years older than Norm. You give you there's a lot of funny stuff in this movie. This is one that stood out to me that I watched it again. I did not remember. So Dr. Farthing is the Chevy Chase character. He's the doctor who's in deep with the bookies. He says, I know there's really nobody to blame for this but myself. Well, I don't know. Maybe the Buffalo Bills, the Boston Red Sox, or Mr. T. He says Mr. T, and then
Mr.
Norm's character goes, wait a minute, Mr. T, are you telling me that you bet on the fight in Rocky 3 and that you bet against Rocky? And Chevy Chase says, hindsight is 20/20, my friend. I think that's hilarious. Betting on fights in movies. That's so good. And this is also one of the funniest bits. There's so many. We could just read the whole movie, but I want people who haven't seen it or have seen it and it's been a while, I just want to remind you of some of the hilarity in this thing. There's a bit where Norm and Artie go to prison, right? Because they get a revenge for hire business. They get on the wrong side of the law. They end up in jail, and Norm gets anally raped by another prisoner, which goes back to his whole SNL thing, right? Like he kind of knew it had to happen if he ends up in prison. But there's this hilarious bit right after he gets raped, and he's yelling, he's sort of reprimanding the men who raped him, and it's just so funny. You fellas have a lot of growing up to do, I'll tell you that. Ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Can you believe these characters? Way out of line. Way out of line. I have a good mind to go to the warden about this. You know what hurts the most about it is the lack of respect, you know? That's what hurts the most. I mean, except for the other thing. That hurts the most. But the lack of respect hurts the second most.
It shouldn't be funny, but it's funny. Oh,
well, that's what Norm could do, man. I mean, he could make stuff that's you're not supposed to laugh about, could make it absolutely hilarious. without like necessarily like sort of punching down or something, right? I mean, that was him. It was the joke is he got anally raped, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
yeah, that's so funny. So Dirty Work, I don't know. I remember seeing it like a year or two after it came out, actually, with some friends of mine, but it kind of disappeared. And now, like, yeah, it's a cult hit. Kevin Hart of all people, and I don't know why I was surprised by this, but he was on something. He basically said this is his favorite movie, right? So it's very well respected amongst comedy aficionados at this point. There's just so many good gags. Him constantly getting thrown out of buildings or into dumpsters is hilarious. It's just like every half the scenes end with him getting thrown into a dumpster or out of the door. Let's see. So, okay. So after SNL, he's kicked off of SNL. He's lost all his money gambling at least once or twice. Dirty Work comes out. It's a total box office failure. It's this point where he starts to he's been on talk shows promoting stuff, but it's at this point after Dirty Work where he really starts kind of coming into this sort of talk show legend status, where I think he really like it becomes like almost a primary outlet for him, because he's always done stand-up, but he hasn't released any specials or CDs or anything yet. Right, he had Weekend Update, he had this movie, nothing. You can't buy a recording of Norm MacDonald, you have to go see him live, right? So the talk show thing becomes pretty interesting. One of the ones that to me really showed you what he could do in this environment was when he goes on The View in, I think it's 2000 or 9, I think it's 2000.
It's right after the election.
Yeah.
It's like right after the whole thing got like figured out.
Yeah, I think it's in the middle of it happening because
no,
you're right.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. Because it's like I hope I hope the right man wins or whatever. Like I hope Bush wins. Yeah.
Because so it's when Bush and Gore is going on, and they ask him if he likes Bush, and he says, he says something like, I think I have the actual quote. He says he loves George W. Bush. He's not a liar, a crook, murderer, or anything like that. I think we should get the homicide out of the White House. And they're like, and Barbara Walters and Joy Behar and all of them are like, what are you talking about? And Norm just plays it like total dumb. He's like, didn't you hear that Bill Clinton killed a guy? And like later on, they're like going kind of nuts. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was a matter of public record that he killed a guy.
I thought it was just a fact.
So good. Oh my God. And so like they didn't know what to do with him. I mean, Barbara Walters has this moment where she's like, you're supposed to be funny, not realizing that he's absolutely killing it. Now, one funny thing about that story is apparently he basically walked out of a 3-day poker binge at the Hollywood Bowl to go do that performance on The View, right? So like he said he didn't sleep for 3 days. How true that is, I don't know. But around this time, he also goes on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and which is only notable for a couple of things. One, he almost won the $1 million. It was supposed to go to charity. It was going to go to Paul Newman's charity. If you watch it, he wasn't 100% sure what his final answer was going to be. So Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was this game show hosted by Regis Philbin. For people who don't know, basically you answered a series of multiple choice questions. They got harder and harder and harder. And then eventually you got to a point where like you would lose all of it if you got it wrong. So you could either stay with whatever you'd got or you'd answer and you'd lose all of it, right? So he'd won $500,000 for charity. He gets to the last question. The last question is, during the Cold War, the U.S. government built a bunker to house Congress under what golf resort? And then they named 4 golf resorts. Norm didn't know, but the one he was going to guess was the correct one. And Regis kind of talked him out of it, out of answering. And so Norm MacDonald just decides, I'll just keep the 500,000. And then when they say, oh, it's this, it's Greenbrier, which Norm had said was his guess. You could see Norm like comes out of his seat for a second, like, what did you just do to me? Why did you like why did you talk me out? And he like settles down, but there's like a second where he's like, what?
That all the wires of years and years of gambling.
Right.
Just,
right.
Yeah.
You're like, you can't. So he did get he got kind of cheated out of that in a way. If you watch it, that's the impression that you get anyway.
$500,000 buys a lot of pasta sauce.
It does buy a lot of pasta
for Newman's.
Right.
Zone.
Yeah. So again, the talk show thing's heating up. He's on David Letterman a lot. He's on Conan O'Brien a lot. He's on Howard Stern fairly often. Those are always good interviews. Though Howard Stern, go ahead.
Divorced now?
Yeah, divorced in 1999.
Yeah, okay. So we're way ahead of that. Okay.
Yeah. Never would marry again. Later on, sometime in the mid 2010s, says I haven't had sex in a decade. Whether he had relationships at all is pretty unclear. There was
only during the making of Dirty Work.
Right.
Yeah.
Of a method thing.
Yeah. There was some speculation. There was a rumor for a while, I think in the late 90s, that he was dating Elle Macpherson, but he never really confirmed or denied that.
It's so interesting because he's a good looking guy.
Yeah.
Norm MacDonald. He's a handsome guy.
Yeah, I don't think
it's just like he thought it was bullshit, probably.
That's what he said. He said he'd come to a point where it just like it wasn't interesting to him. Like, yeah. You know, he has these funny jokes about like he would always refer to sex as laying down on top of a lady. That's how it's
I mean, most of the time that's what it is.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
So he's got these, and I didn't really know what, we kind of refer to some of these bits, and you never really knew what you were getting when he came on to talk on any of these talk shows. The Howard Stern ones aren't that great. I mean, you're in prime Howard Stern shock jock territory, and Howard Stern doesn't have the right kind of playfulness for Norm, in my opinion. Like David Letterman and Conan knew how to like kind of give him room or give him just that right kind of play the straight man a little bit to make it funny, be a little bit outraged at what Norm is saying, so it kind of works. Howard never did that. Howard was always just like, well, what were her tits like? It never really, it was always kind of like, it just didn't work with Norm. Actually, for folks who haven't seen it, I would recommend looking up the old Tom Green show when Norm comes on. They're actually pretty funny, and you can tell that Norm really likes Tom Green. They oddly have a very similar sense of humor, and plus you get these two Ottawa guys talking, and Norm kind of forgets he's on a show. It feels like he really just kind of starts talking about what growing up in Ottawa was like, and really just kind of revealing a little bit, not too revealing, but just interesting to see him in that mode. One of my favorite things I sent out in the Telegram today, I think, was on Conan. He does the Kitchener-Leslie story, which cracks me up. It's just this old time story about like an old hobo riding the rails, running into this old railroad dick, and like, I don't even want to give the punchline away, but it's a long story, but it has a very simple punchline. It's not the moth joke, but it's a 3 minutes joke that could have been 15 seconds, 30 seconds long.
It's like shaggy. I think what people call it is these shaggy dog stories, where it's like you sort of go through this whole thing just for this very slight payoff. And it's really not like, the moth joke is not funny, but it is because of the way that he does it. He even says that. He's like, a guy in my cab told me this joke. And Conan's like, well, why wouldn't we just have him on? He's like, well, you should hear me do it.
Well, the moth joke is really interesting. So part of I was curious what the backstory about that was, because, so for folks who don't know, like, the moth joke is a joke where a moth goes into, where I think the basic outline of it is like a moth goes in and starts to the doctor's office and starts telling him he's got problems, and then it turns out it's a podiatrist's office. The podiatrist says, why are you here? And the moth says, because the light was on. That's the joke. And Norm stretches it out into about a 7-minute joke with like tinges of Russian literature, right? And about how, like, looking over at my son and I realized I don't love him anymore. All these things goes on and on and on and on, but it's ultimately the same joke because the light was on, right? It's like a street joke that he expanded into this thing. Apparently, the root of this was Norm shows up to do his normal whatever 2 minutes or whatever, and the next guest was not available. And so Conan asked him if he could fill in for 7 minutes. And the thing is, Norm's presentations on these things, they always seem just like conversations. Like they don't always seem all that prepared, but they were always prepared. He always knew what he was going to do when he came out there and thought about it and mulled it over, and it was going to be something nobody'd ever seen before. And so he's like stuck. He's like, what am I going to do? And he just decided he was going to stretch out the moth joke for 7 minutes, and it works. It's hilarious in a way. I mean,
part of the joke is that he's telling that joke,
right?
And it's like, how is he finally going to wind his way back to the punchline?
Right.
It's like absurdism.
Yeah, it's the ridiculousness, right? That you're stretching it out like this, right? Yeah. And so I was just super impressed that, and again, you think about that gambler thing, right? Like 7 minutes, what are you going to do? I mean, I think a lesser comedian would have maybe just like done an old bit, talked about something they talked out on a show a few years ago, just shot, they would have just filled it in somehow.
Just like fall into,
Right. Right. And he's like, well, let's just put it all on double zeros. Let's see what happens, in front of millions of people. It's amazing. It's amazing in a way from that perspective, I think.
Going into comedy, I want to ask Blake something. Going into comedy, Blake, do you slowly discover like what you're gonna do if you corpse? Like if you forget your stuff, do you like go, okay, maybe a little crowd work, or do you fall back on old bit? Like, it's a personal style thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really just if you never really forget your stuff. It's just like if it's where you're like, oh, they're not going to like what I am. So how do I still enter? You make that game time call of, okay, well, do I just hammer them with who I am with material, or do I hammer them in a riffy? I mean, like last night is a perfect example. They did not like any dark, and that's all I do. So it's just dark stuff. It's all tinged with darkness, even if it's a very banal topic. But I was like, well, I will just be myself and riff. And I mean, I did it for 45 minutes. So it's like, it's not, I'll do some. I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll try a joke now. And then they're like, well, we hate that. It's like, okay, well, all right, here we go. Back to me fucking around. But yeah, I mean, you still want to entertain, but there can be entertainment even in the idea that we've agreed that I don't like you guys and you don't like what I am, but we will still have fun.
Right.
I know, Blake, we're coming up against your time. I think you said you got maybe another 10 minutes, but before we'll keep you for the duration if you're willing to stick around.
Yeah,
awesome, man. But do you want to give your plugs one more time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's big rad machine on everything: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of that dumb bullshit. And then Blake 182 on YouTube. Go watch it. It's a fun set.
It's
resident comedian on Art of Darkness.
I know, man.
Hey, it's like we'll always have you back on, man.
Yeah,
you know what I was gonna bring up is that it's very funny that we did Bill Hicks and then we did Norm, because there was a part on Norm's podcast where he makes fun of Bill Hicks, like does a whole bit where he makes fun of Bill Hicks. He like takes gasoline and is gonna light himself on fire to make a big statement. He's like, this is comedy.
No, he didn't like that kind of he did not like Bill Hicks's style, any of that. He didn't like any of the political stuff. I mean, it's very interesting. Two very different kinds of guys.
Funny. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's I just trying to imagine Norm MacDonald actually trying to do some his kind of political humor is that that George W. Bush thing about Bill Clinton being a murderer. It's not even it's not even that he necessarily believes Bill Clinton's a murderer. Maybe he does. It's not even necessarily that he loves George W. Bush or not. He wants to make that discomfort. What he really wanted to do was get Barbara Walters and Joy Behar riled up, right?
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, whether he liked George, it's irrelevant what his actual political opinions are, if he has any, right? Because he would often say, like, it's funny that I was the Weekend Update guy because I didn't know anything about politics. Like, I didn't know.
Well,
I knew nothing.
Another thing that makes it funny is that there's some guy watching that going, yeah, the Clintons are murderers. He's right. Yeah.
Right.
It's, you go, what is it? Yeah, how can you say this on network on like some morning show?
Daytime TV.
It's 10 in the morning.
Right.
Like you have to realize it's also 10 in the morning in front of a bunch of housewives.
Yeah.
And he's like, I thought he murdered somebody.
Oh man, yeah, and in context and like structurally, what those shows represent for someone to come on and just say that.
And he also later in that interview, he goes, they switch topics to like he has an embarrassing himself in front of Bill Cosby story, and he goes, Bill Cosby, he's a great man, he's never done anything wrong. I mean, just saying that, knowing. Like, because there was like a case against him in the early 90s, and it sort of got brushed over. And he was like, yeah, he's never done anything wrong. Like, it's like, God.
Well, he does. He does. He says to all of them, he's like, we love Bill Cosby, right? We love Bill Cosby.
He just keeps not doing the joke, keeps not telling the story. Yeah, because we all love Bill Cosby. He's a great man. And
oh, that's how you know. That's how you know Norm. Well, Norm did love Bill Cosby as a comedian, right? Like,
oh, absolutely,
total respect for him. But like, that was one thing. That's how you know that Norm's got a little bit something against you, is if he says, "Oh, well, he's a good man."
Yeah, that's a good guy.
yeah. So funny. So let's do this. We got a couple of minutes. I want to talk about the Bob Saget roast. Blake, what do you remember do you remember any specific jokes from that Bob Saget roast? If not, I got some, but I'm curious how you remember.
I remember he did the Greg Giraldo's got the eyes of an eagle or whatever. This man's for the birds. I remember that and being like, man, what the fuck is he doing? And then like just kept. I mean, like once he got to Saget, he was like, yeah, you brought a shotgun to that game because we were watching the Lions play the Tigers. And then he like eventually broke down because he said the dog face thing.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, you got a face like a fucking dog.
Right.
Oh, yeah. He's like, that's what it says. Oh, the well. Yeah. He's like, well wishers here. And a lot of people that would wish you down one.
Right.
They want to throw you down a well. It says here on this card.
Right. No, dude, there's so many. There's and a lot of them were the delivery. I mean, clearly it was like the context that makes it funny, but a lot of them is the delivery too. Like one I've got wrote down that is not fun. It's hard to explain to somebody who doesn't immediately think these are funny. I mean, you can never quite explain why anything's funny, but he says, your face looks like a flower. Yeah, cauliflower. Like, and then he repeats it. He says, your face looks like a cauliflower. It's just the stupidest thing ever.
It's so dumb, but it's so funny. It's so stupid. And then they're also part of the bit that I don't think anybody remembers is that he was reading a paper on stage.
Yep.
And then when they would say his name, he would pull it down like a disappointed dad and then go back to reading.
reading the paper.
And it was all because they said that they wanted him to be offensive and raunchy. And he was like, no.
Yeah, that was the thing. He said he had a couple points about it. It's like one, he didn't really like roasts. Like he wasn't. He liked the old timey roasts, but like to him, so there was this tradition of the Friars Club, which is basically this show business club in New York, where towards the end of your career they'd bring you up and you do a roast, but all the people would be your friends. the thing about the Comedy Central roast is like you'd get one or two friends, like John Stamos from Full House was the Bob Saget, the MC for the Bob Saget roast. So they bring in a friend or two, and then they bring in a bunch of comedians who are just good at roasts.
Yeah.
And it's one thing for a guy you've known 20 years to talk shit about you, right? Like,
Brad, you old
right.
so-and-so.
Right. I can laugh that off. That's funny. And I can pitch him back. It's another thing to show up and some jackass is insulting you publicly. It's like, it's a little harder to swallow.
Well, it's also weird for that person too. I mean, like, they're trying, I mean, it's a career opportunity for them to go on. I mean, like, Jeselnik, I think he's very funny, but like he had to go and be mean to these people he did not know. Yeah,
it's tough. It's got to be tough. Yeah. One thing, I want to get two more of these jokes out real quick, and then we'll let you go. One is, so Jim Norton was also on the roast, and at least at the time, Jim Norton did not get it at all. He basically just thought Norm was not doing a good job of roasting Saget, right? And he says at one point, Jim Norton does, because they roast each other too. They don't just roast the subject, right? They roast each other. That's kind of part of the thing. Jim Norton says something about watching Norm up here is like watching Henry Fonda pick blueberries, which is from this old movie in the 80s on Golden Pond. And Norm comes up and he says to everybody this, I don't think there's a person in here who wouldn't love watching Henry Fonda pick blueberries. And then he's got another one that's pretty good. Susie Essman, I think. He says Susie Essman is famous for being a vegetarian. She may be a vegetarian, but she'll always be full of baloney in my book. This is so stupid. And these are apparently, and here's another connection to his dad and with this whole lineage is, these are apparently all from a book of jokes that his father gave him as a gift when Norm first got into comedy. They were like jokes for retirement, like you would read these at somebody's retirement party.
Yeah.
Right. Which it's kind of sweet in a way that his dad gave him this book and he kept it all this time and decided this is when to deploy it. And because it's for his friend, and he literally at the end, I mean, before he signs off, he tells Bob that he loves him, right? And that everybody should, and how great of a guy Bob is. That's how he ends it all, because Bob Saget is his dear friend, for decades at this point. So it's hilarious. It's that perfect Norm moment because it's hilarious. It's bizarre. It's incredibly memorable. It's something that everybody else isn't doing. It's the opposite of what he was supposed to be doing. And then there's this sweetness in it too, which I think is important about Norm, is ultimately there's like this sweetness. So
Blake, thank you for coming on to help us cover Norm. We're gonna take it from here. When you got a schedule.
Hell yeah.
Let me take you out to Chinese when you're in the Twin Cities. You're touring. You're going around and you're doing shows. Big Rad Machine. And
Big Rad Machine. Look me up. I will post all my dates. And man, come out to a show.
Yeah, absolutely. Go watch Blake 182. It's hilarious. It's so good.
Thank you, man. Yes. Thank you guys. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Right, Thank you for your time.
Anytime.
Man.
See you guys.
All right. Thanks, Blake.
Hey.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah.
All right.
Now the show's about to get a lot less funny.
We'll do our best.
Kevin, you're gonna have to step your game up here. I'm just
kidding.
No, that was good. That was really good.
The more I read about this Blake Hammond guy, he's great guest.
Yeah. No, he's great.
We love having Blake on. And it's really funny. And his Instagram, funny. You want to laugh in your feed, worth it. He's hilarious. And it's really good to get somebody like that for an episode on a stand-up comedian. He clearly loves Norm, and I don't understand the ins and outs of being a stand-up comedian, right? And there were a couple times in there where Blake brought that personal experience that I think really helped us understand what's going on with Norm. Yeah, and we had some laughs too. It's nice to have somebody on who was inspired to do what they do now at an increasingly high professional level of comedy, right. But who was like, it was Norm's special. I love stuff like that. That was really, that was really cool. You hold down the fort, keep going. I'm listening. Yep. I've got a childcare situation. Understood. Check on my son, but go on. Yep, I'm going to keep going. So one last thing about the Bob Saget roast, and this is a really the whole roast is kind of an important moment in the Norm story. I mean, it's 2008. Right, he's a decade or so out from SNL.
He's in this sort of mature period. We're hitting what we might call late MacDonald. The thing that was interesting, and he talks about it afterwards, apparently a lot of people obviously couldn't figure it out. And I know Norm would say, I don't really know what there was to figure out. I mean, it's you either think it's funny or you don't. But the one thing he was sort of perplexed by is some people were like referring to him as being possibly mentally ill. And Norm's thing was like, well, I mean, if you don't like it, that's fine, but don't think I was like crazy. Like I knew what I was doing. Right. And that was kind of perplexing for him. I thought that was just an interesting note about how he views himself in sort of relation to comedy and the audience and what he's doing. Now, we talked about how he's been on all these talk shows. He's a legendary talk show guest. And what ends up happening, sort of maybe the peak of this might be when he was on Letterman's final show. Letterman in 2015 retired from network television. He later had other shows, and he's always been he's still a prominent cultural figure. But this is when David Letterman is going off of late night in 2015. And for the last act, the last comedian, he brought in Norm MacDonald, which was a huge honor for Norm. And I think in a way, a big honor for David Letterman. David Letterman basically said that Norm, and he would call him Norm MacDonald, which I think Norm appreciated. He called Norm MacDonald the funniest guy in the business. He basically said there's nobody funnier than Norm. Norm does a set, and I don't want to rehash his bits, but you know, it's pretty funny. One thing he says, apparently Oprah Winfrey was on the same episode, and Norm's first thing is, I just wanted to point out that Oprah and I are making the same money tonight, which I think is pretty funny. He has this joke about, he says, I don't smoke weed, I don't drink. Hardest drug I ever did was LSD. Remember when I was a kid, they would warn you about flashbacks, and I like to stretch my drug dollar, you know. But the point is this: 10 years have passed, 20 years have passed, and no flashbacks. What a jip! Just more horseshit from the big acid companies. It's just really funny. He's up there in his suit telling this. He's got a great bit about how, you know, back in the day, everybody if you had a photo, you had one photo. There was one photo of you back in the day, right? And now there's 100,000.
That acid joke is hilarious.
It's really good.
I want to get the most out of my drug dollars. That's right. Somebody told me there'd be flashbacks.
Yeah. Right.
I love that kind of down home, homey, kind of derpy grandpa.
Yeah.
Drinking an Arnold Palmer, talking about acid.
Right. Yeah. There's a joke he has somewhere where he says, before he's talking about his health, and he says, you know, before I go on stage, I take a fistful of acid. My doctor says I got to knock it off. But what the hell does he know? He's a giant purple dog. It's just like,
woof, woof, woof.
It's so good. He's got that great bit on this last Letterman performance. He has this great bit on Germany about how Germany went to war with the world. And then a few years later, again, Germany went to war against the world. And it was actually pretty close. He talks about Hitler. Right. He refers to him as and the second time, this time they had that guy that guy. They had him. And it was close. Yeah.
It got real. Yeah, it got real. It got hairy there for a minute. Yeah, applying that kind of like barbershop kind of at the bar humor, but elevating it to this Tolstoyan kind of Chekhovian level of subject matter, and then of course the perfect delivery, and it's just great.
That timing, everything. He's just he's so good. I just wanted to read this last thing because there's also a thing that happens right at the end of this last David Letterman performance in 2015 where Norm gets emotional. It's probably the most emotional you ever see him. And the last words he says is, and he does, in this really touching moment, he does David Letterman's bit from way back in the day when Norm saw Dave perform as a child. When Norm was a kid, he saw him perform at some performing arts center in Toronto or whatever. And Norm remembered that joke his whole life and told it again on Letterman's final performance, which is a very touching thing, in my opinion, and shows the deep level of respect, the way these two careers have intertwined. But this is the last thing he says. Now, he says, Mr. Letterman is not for the mawkish, and he has no truck for the sentimental. But if something is true, then it is not sentimental. And I say in truth, Dave, I love you. It's like, that's... And he gets very emotional. He kind of hides from the camera a little bit, and you can tell he's trying to hold back tears. And this is a very big moment for him, a very big emotional moment. This kind of thing, this I love you thing, he did it for Bob Saget too. This was happening more, and we're going to talk more about this in the After Dark, because he, at this point in 2015, he has had cancer. Nobody really knows that he has, but he's been staring into the abyss a bit. We're going to talk more about that in the After Dark. But he's starting to tell his friends that he loves them, texting them randomly. Hey, man, remember, I love you. That kind of thing.
Yeah, heavy.
Yeah. Now, throughout the 2000s and the 2010s, he plays a bunch of he gets a bunch of acting roles. None of them are particularly long running or particularly prominent. One thing we did miss, he had a sitcom in 1999 through 2001 called The Norm Show. I play Norm, he would say.
Right. Like, one of his stand-up specials is called Me Doing Stand-Up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you call it?
Yeah. It's not.
But it was calculated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that joke. He would always stop for a second. I play Norm. Yeah. And it's a pretty good sitcom, but it's a sitcom. It's not. There's nothing like really revolutionary about it. Apparently in 2007 or 2008, there was some talks about him doing a sort of faux reality show that would be basically like, the only thing I can think of is like Curb Your Enthusiasm almost, right? Because you imagine Curb Your Enthusiasm, but with Norm instead of Larry David. Definitely could be quite funny.
I'd
right?
watch that.
Yeah, with good writers, it could be hilarious, right? So that was in the works and never really happened. He does get this show on for a little bit. This is his second sitcom. It's called A Minute with Stan Hooper. I couldn't really I had a hard time even finding. I was going to watch an episode or two of it because I missed it back in the day. The premise is pretty interesting. So I'm just going to read the plot premise of A Minute with Stan Hooper from Wikipedia. Hooper, a famous newspaper columnist turned television commentator, moves his family from their New York home to his small Wisconsin town, Waterford Falls, where he hopes to better get in touch with Middle America and attempt to make his weekly minute-long television commentaries more appealing to a larger audience. While there, he interacts with the folksy and largely strange townspeople of Waterford Falls, almost like the David Lynch kind of thing, a little bit, maybe. Now, here's what's funny, where I think it gets kind of funny. MacDonald has said his goal was for the show to lull its audience into complacency and become more subversive as time went on. It included a plan for Stan's wife, Molly, to be murdered by a drifter at the end of the first season. The show was canceled before any such plans were enacted.
That sounds awesome.
Doesn't it? Right? Like it starts really, as a normal sitcom and then all of a sudden it's getting weirder and weirder and weirder. Yeah.
Somebody should write something like that. Yeah, that's a little bit, Lynchian.
Lynchian.
Waterford Falls sounds like somebody from the Northeast writing the name of a city they think would be in Wisconsin.
Right. Doesn't it? It does. It's a good point.
It doesn't really
it doesn't sound like a Wisconsin place. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Doesn't. Yeah.
You can't fake the funk.
No, that's true.
Wisconsin, the keg of America.
That's right. Let's see. What else did he have going on? Oh, for a while there was a very short-lived sports show with Norm MacDonald. And basically what I'm trying to point out is he had a lot of projects that kicked off in the 2000s and the 2010s that didn't really go anywhere. And I mean, you can speculate on why this happened. Like, apparently people didn't watch A Minute with Stan Hooper. Maybe a broadcast sitcom isn't the right thing. Not many people watched Sports Show with Norm MacDonald, which was basically going to be like a sports version of The Daily Show. But as I learned about how intense the gambling it was, I do sometimes wonder, like, if he just couldn't show up regularly, like, was he just not able to do a steady job? Because these television shows, it's not a job like you're in a cubicle, but you got to show up. It's a grind.
It's a grind.
It's hours a day.
You got a lot of people there
Mm-hmm.
on a schedule, a lot of union people. It's a real, it's called the industry for a reason.
Right, exactly. And, I think ultimately he liked the talk show thing. Like he would go on any talk show that invited him, basically. And he liked stand-up.
Just like us.
Just like us. Yeah, we'll go on any. I would also go on any
practically
show.
anything. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the reason these projects didn't work out is because they weren't really what he wanted to do. You know, he wasn't a writer. Like, I think, for instance, remember when Louis C.K. had not this old sitcom, but the show that he wrote and directed, Louis?
Yeah, of course.
It's brilliant, right?
Little show called Louis. Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It was, and it was incredibly, and we kind of forget about all the interesting stuff Louis C.K. did. Like Norm couldn't have written a show like that, and not because he isn't just as funny as Louis or doesn't have the talent. It's not really where his humor lies. His humor isn't in these like character things. Louis was being very vulnerable when he wrote Louis, right? Showing kind of the insides of his life. Norm never did that in his comedy, right? Like, you can't play the stupid guy who doesn't know anything and also be like vulnerable. It just doesn't play right. And I think that's a big part of why some of these projects don't work out as well, at least the sitcom stuff. He does end up doing what I think is one of the greatest podcasts of all time, Norm MacDonald Live.
Funny as hell. And then, of course, the season of Netflix, I wish that we had 10 more like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it could have gone on. It could have gone on forever. It was another show that it never had to stop. Right. You just keep interviewing people, 10 people a year forever. And it was always good. He brought the best out in people. The Norm MacDonald Live. Did I not? Well, I want to give you give me a second to find.
I'm here with Adam Egat, and we're going to tell some jokes.
They're so good. Well, let me give you one more joke while we're on Norm MacDonald Live. All right. For some reason this thing's not refreshing correctly.
Make it pay. Punish it.
Yeah.
Whip that Chrome browser.
Here's another one. Yeah, here's one from Norm MacDonald Live, the blue card jokes. A study has found that the average high school prom goer now spends $1,000, or $2,000 if you count the abortion.
Oh,
God. Right? According to a new survey, Robin Roberts is America's most trusted news anchor, and America's least trusted news anchor, Matt Lauer. I don't even really get that one.
Matt Lauer. Matt.
Yeah, okay. One more. I can't stand stuck-up bodies of water. It's like, get over yourself, Lake Superior.
God.
So dumb.
So dumb. It's a dad joke. It's a dad joke.
It's totally a dad joke. Yeah. I wanted to just read you.
Part of the humor of this stuff, too, is that it runs so counter to the thread of comedy.
Right.
Like all the new trends, and this is what comedy's going to be now, and we're this, and what does the net mean? And it's like, no, we're just going to sit around and read some dad jokes and crack wise at Hitler. And
it just ultimately is, do you find it fun? Like, does it make you laugh? Like, full stop.
And if only every 3 of those make you laugh, the buildup from the crummy ones is part of the fun.
Right. Oh, right.
Like, every joke doesn't have to be this perfect, polished thing. That's part of the fun of like dumb jokes.
Absolutely. Let me just give you a quick run through some of the people who are on Norm MacDonald Live. Tom Green, Fred Stoller, Russell Brand, Billy Bob Thornton, Larry King, Kevin Nealon, Andy Dick, Ray Romano, Adam Sandler, David Spade, Carl Reiner, Fred Willard. That's actually my favorite one, is the Fred Willard one. Bob Saget, Roseanne Barr, Mark Maron, Stephen Merchant's a great one. Sarah Silverman, Jerry Seinfeld. The Jerry Seinfeld one is great. Caitlyn Jenner was
this is the pod, right?
Yeah. Dana Carvey, Tim Allen. The final episode, I'm skipping some of them. The final episode was Jim Carrey. Now, the show was on They did an episode in 2013 and then an episode in 2014, and then a season in 2014, and then season 3 was sort of and started at the end of 2016 and went into 2017. So there was a several year gap there, and they had a different set in season 3 and that sort of thing. Now, what was going on in the meantime was two things. He was writing this book based on a true story, the Norm MacDonald, not a memoir. And I think one of his big time sinks was he was the pigeon on the Mike Tyson mysteries.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, the Mike Tyson mysteries, which are hilarious, by the way, it was an animated series. Mike Tyson plays himself, and they're almost like a Scooby-Doo gang that goes around and solves mysteries. It's Mike Tyson. It's this girl. I can't remember her relationship to him. It's the ghost of the guy who invented the Queensberry rules.
Right. Of course. Our friend from the Oscar Wilde episode.
Exactly. It's all connected. Right. And then Norm MacDonald plays a pigeon. Like Perfect. An actual pigeon, and he's dirty. He's filthy. He's constantly making filthy jokes, and like he's horned up. He's liquored up. So Norm was on like 50 episodes, all of the episodes of that, and he was writing this book. So I think that's where the break in the podcast came. Unlike us, who we just do everything all at once. No breaks ever.
We go hard.
That's
Your
right.
Favorite effort pod. Support the pod. Get ready for the After Dark episode. Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. Season 3 book club. It's all happening.
It is all happening. All of it. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about his lifestyle and the way he rolled in this last 10 years or so.
I'm glad you said that, because I have an episode title, and it is going to be... Oh, you know what? I was going to say Norm MacDonald's rolling punchline, but I sort of like Norm MacDonald's punchline tautology.
Which one would Norm prefer?
I don't know if he'd prefer either.
What if it's like Norm and the perfect joke?
No, something? I think it would be. I. You know what? Norm MacDonald makes a joke.
Okay. All right, we can let that simmer. We don't have to decide right now.
Norm, okay, all right. Wow. Yeah, okay. Yeah. You let me know.
We're not quite done yet. Something could pop up too.
Okay.
Okay. So in 2008 or so, he does this radio interview that's, I think, quite revealing, and I think he's only partially joking. And he talks about, it's like with one of these morning zoo radio people, that's a guy and a girl, and he's talking about how he has this very monk-like existence. They're like, oh, you must have a big house. He's like, I live in a very small apartment. You must go out with women a lot. I haven't had sex in a decade. What about a car? He didn't drive. He never learned how to drive.
Even out in LA.
Right. Exactly. And there are some stories from a couple people who had fallings out with him, including the comedian Fred Stoller, who says that he could be very manipulative to get people to give him a ride.
Oh, boy.
Because he's out wherever he is. I don't know where in LA he was. But yeah, for people who've been to LA, you kind of need a car.
You need a car.
Right. And he's and there's other things in this interview that are really interesting, because they talk about, you drink, you smoke pot. He would always claim that he didn't really drink and he didn't smoke pot. I don't know how true that is. Part of that is image. Tom Segura, the comedian Tom Segura, tells a story about smoking weed with him right before a show. And this would have been like 2012 or 2015, right around there. So I don't know how true, what was he an alcoholic? I don't think so. Did he have a drink from time to time? I think he probably did. Same thing for pot, whatever. Clearly his real vice was gambling, as we've discussed, right? But in this interview, he talks about how he's upset. He wants to look at life headlong. Is how he describes it. He wants to look right at it as it's coming, right? He doesn't want these things. He's not materialist because he doesn't want these things. He says at one point that he bought a house, and as soon as he bought it, he says it differently, but paraphrasing, he says, I bought myself a prison cell. Like he feels like he's getting hemmed in and owning things just keeps him bound to physical reality almost, right? And so these things don't really, part of it is like, I mean, I guess if you don't spend money on anything, losing $400,000 is not that as big of a deal as
you don't have a big family, you don't have a wife. He has the one child.
He's got the one son.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like he's got 5 kids, 3 different women. Yeah.
Right. He claims in this interview that he eats all of his meals at a nearby diner, that he doesn't even make coffee at home. He has coffee at the diner. And yeah, I mean, he's sort of settled into this like retired old man widower style of life in a way. And he's reading a lot. He reads a lot of Russian literature. He reads a lot of Mark Twain. He says he said he would often read books over again. So he would often reread the same books, really trying to get as much out of them as he possibly could. And a lot of this is partially why I think he wanted to write the memoir as a novel. He was sort of flabbergasted when they were putting it in the nonfiction section at bookstores. He's like, it's clearly a novel. It's clearly a novel. Like, and even if you don't know him that well, you're like 10 or 15 pages in, you're like, oh, he's making this up. This is not real, right? And the fourth wall gets broken and all kinds of stuff. It's very funny. It's very well done. But it's not his life story. Yeah, let's see what else. So okay, I want to get into his sort of, there's a controversy kind of at the end, towards the end, right? So we've got his Norm MacDonald Live goes until 2017, and then in 2018 basically the same show gets turned into a Netflix show. It goes off of, I think it was on All Things Comedy or something like that. They give it a little bit of a budget. It's essentially the same show though, except it's on Netflix instead of, right now it's even hard to find Norm MacDonald Live. Like you got to put in just the right keywords to get to his site. Like there's a couple episodes on YouTube, but the whole thing isn't on YouTube, for instance. Now he moves into this, Norm MacDonald has a show, and it's interesting. Apparently, the CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, Norm MacDonald was his favorite comedian.
Right? That helps.
Mm-hmm. Right. It definitely helps. And so when Dave Chappelle was getting that, multiple tens of millions of dollar deal to release these specials, that was actually Ted Sarandos kind of doing, according to Norm. I don't know how true that is. And this and they were sort of like, well, Norm, what are we going to do with you? Like, what can we do with you? And he just wanted to keep doing his same show, basically have him and Adam Egget in studio. And part of the reason he wanted to do this was he loved all the old broadcasters. He loved Johnny Carson. He loved Bob Hope. He loved that old feel, that weirdly kind of classic feel of things. Mm-hmm. And he didn't dress up for it, and he swore and he said terrible things, but he liked the intro music. He liked, he would even use some of the same catchphrases, like Larry King used to say, for the full hour we've got whoever. Norm MacDonald would say that we've got, for the full hour, Dana Carvey. Like, of course it's for the full hour.
I kind of remember show. This. Yeah,
right? Yeah. Just funny little bits like that. When he has when it goes to Netflix, it's called Norm MacDonald Has a Show, which I think is great. Some of the guests there include David Spade, Drew Barrymore, Judge Judy, David Letterman came on, Chevy Chase, Michael Keaton, M. Night Shyamalan. I forgot about that one. Lorne Michaels comes on, and then Billy Joe Shaver. Billy Joe Shaver was Norm's favorite musician, this old country music guy. And Norm MacDonald said he was one of the best. He and Bob Dylan were the two best writers alive. And he's got this thing. Norm has a thing from a Billy Joe Shaver song that he really likes, which became a very meaningful statement for him, which was, I'm just an old chunk of coal, but I'm going to be a diamond someday. That's sort of, in his later years, that's kind of encapsulates in some way Norm's perspective on himself and his own life. We're going to talk about the religion stuff a little bit. because it does factor in, because throughout these 2010s, he's sort of on a spiritual journey. It ends up with him being a Christian, but it doesn't necessarily start that way. I mean, the first kind of spiritual advisor sort of person he goes to is actually a rabbi. And he thought that he learned quite a bit talking to this guy. He was trying to understand God, understand the faith of his culture, but also what it could mean for him. He would talk about at times sort of struggling with it, like not knowing not coming around to this conclusion that it's almost not what you believe. It's the whole thing is really it's a sort of a wrestling match with yourself, right? So it's not necessarily about like, oh, do you believe these things? It's the very old, the way we used to think about religion before we all so many people let themselves be atheists, where you wrestled with it, right? It was something,
right?
You didn't give up on it really ever, but you kind of came and went out of it, and you doubted things, and you found your faith again. He was on that sort of track, and he talks at one point about going to like almost like evangelical revival type meetings and saying like, I don't really believe what they're saying, but I feel good when I'm here. Something resonates here with me. And I don't know what it is exactly, but he's trying to sort of figure that out. He does have jokes about this whole religious thing that are sometimes funny. Like at one point he says, I don't like to get preachy. All I'm saying is that the only way to get to to heaven is through the Lord Jesus Christ. That's all I'm saying.
That's all I'm saying. No big deal.
I don't want to get preachy, but
one true faith. That's right. Yeah.
He's coming around to it. He does seem to be coming around.
Did he make it to the church, or did he just linger in Protestant land?
He went. I don't think he ever really settled on as far as I know, he settled on a particular denomination. But I know one thing, like later in his career when he was touring for comedy, he would go to churches. When he was in a new city, he would go to a church. He would go to a church service.
That's nice. Yeah,
it was something he took quite seriously. I want to talk. We're going to kind of circle back around to that a little bit. First, I want to talk about the final Norm MacDonald controversy. We had the controversy with the transsexual menace and with Don Ohlmeyer and the whole OJ thing. We had the controversies with when he got kicked out of the state of Iowa, right?
Yeah,
he's not immune to these controversies at all. There was another one that I'm blanking on. Anyway, OJ, yeah, the whole OJ thing. Oh, one thing I wanted to say about OJ, what I meant to say earlier, Norm MacDonald became very close friends with Kato Kaelin after the whole thing. Remember Kato Kaelin?
And the name.
Yeah, Kato Kaelin was a house guest of O.J. Simpson at the time of the murders and was a witness in the trial. And Kato Kaelin was like a failed actor who like kind of parlayed that court appearance into like some level of fame, though I don't know, like he never had money or anything, or never really starred in anything. But he was like in the 90s, especially, he was like, people knew Kato Kaelin was. But Norm MacDonald became friends with him. They would go play tennis together and play golf together, apparently. Because this is another thing that Norm needed, especially like in the 2010s. He lived right next to his mother, right, in these later years. He'd moved her in right next to him. And he wanted to have a friend. He wanted to have friends around. And sometimes when you get to be like, he's a bit older man, he's got some money, he's got some success, but he doesn't have any real family, right? His kid is an adult at this point, or basically an adult. He's not married. He's not in a romantic relationship. He's not having more kids. And so he kind of would bring like buddies around.
Yeah.
And
sure.
The thing is all his friends that he came up with, they're either gone, like Chris Farley, or they're like Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler's, he's your friend, but he's not going to buddy around with you on a Wednesday.
Yeah, he's busy.
Yeah, right. So he needed people like Kato Kaelin, who doesn't have anything else going on.
Okay.
Right. And who can drive him.
And I can see him in LA too. This is quite a scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And drive him
permanently sunny. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, and so he always, so it's just a kind of interesting trying to picture him there, and the image that I like to have him in these later years is not it's maybe a little bit of a sad image, but I don't think it was necessarily sad for him. It's literally him sitting in his house, maybe watching a sports game, watching some sports or reading a book, reading Dostoevsky, and writing some jokes down. And the funny thing about the whole reading bit, other people would say this, he'd be on his third reading of the Brothers Karamazov, right? And he would refer to it, and when he's talking to somebody, he would be like, yeah, I'm reading this Dostoevsky guy, something, I don't know what it is. It's all right. But like he knew exactly what he was reading, right? Like he's not, yeah. So funny. Okay, so the last controversy, as I promised. Okay, so for folks who might remember, it's not that long ago. It's 2017, 2018. Louis C.K. got Me Too'd, right? People remember that he was masturbate. He would like get these young female comedians in his office and he would like masturbate in front of them. He would ask if he could masturbate in front of them. Then he would, right, for people who might remember that. So that happened and a bunch of people were getting Me Too'd. And another thing that happened was Roseanne's show was coming back, basically the same show, but it was the same characters, same actors, and it was coming back, 20 some years later. And Roseanne got into a bit of trouble. I don't know if people remember this that well. She's, they got this show on now called The Conners that used to be her show that they kicked her off of because of these tweets. And basically, I want to get this right. Hold on, let me click this link. So May 29th, 2008, Roseanne Barr responded to a thread on Twitter about Valerie Jarrett, a senior advisor to former president. Valerie Jarrett. Okay.
Yeah.
Her tweet, Roseanne Barr's tweet said, "Muslim Brotherhood and the Planet of the Apes had a baby equals VJ."
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember.
Yeah, it wasn't good. And so this is basically the end of Roseanne's career. Now, there's a lot of hedging. There's a lot of things that can be said about the background, and I'm not here to like I'm not here to like bring this back out and decide whether good or bad or anything, right? Apparently, she was on Ambien and a bunch of other stuff, and who knows? But the point, I guess, is that for us is that Norm wrote a piece that was basically talking about both Louis C.K. and Roseanne Barr and another comedian, Chris Hardwick, who'd also been Me Too'd, basically talking about how, that these people had suffered too, right? Their careers had been taken away from them, and discussing whether or not it was sort of fair for their entire careers to be taken away from, and how he tried to put Louis C.K. and Roseanne Barr in touch because they were the only two people he knew who'd had their entire careers taken away from them overnight. And he thought that they might be able to relate to each other, right? And so you're not allowed to, 2018, you're not allowed to show any ambiguity towards people who have violated the narrative, right?
Right.
Louis C.K. has to be 100% evil. Roseanne Barr has to be 100% evil. Anything less than that, and you might as well be them, right? And so Norm came under fire for this. Part of the problem was at the same time he's trying to promote Norm MacDonald has a show, right? He's supposed to go on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and they disinvite him because members of the staff are crying because they're scared of Norm MacDonald coming on.
Ugh. God,
right? It's so
Fallon
on Fallon, yeah. So they don't have him on, and it's so funny because you look back on it, it's only a few years ago, and it's like, guys, come on, like. Even if you disagree with Norm, what are we crying about? We're crying?
Right. And then this guy, in a few years, he's going to be dead. He's one of the greatest comedians to ever live. And you've just blown your shot over a news cycle.
Right.
Of hysteria.
Right. Yeah. Now, here's where it got a little bit, here's where he kind of dug himself in a little bit more of a hole. So he goes on Howard Stern and he's talking about, he's talking about this whole thing. I think this might have been before Fallon. I might have it. I think it's after Fallon, the Fallon cancellation. He basically says something about like, he thinks that if you, he says something along the lines of like, if you think I'm okay with what Louis did, you'd have to have Down syndrome. So that's what he says. He's basically saying, I don't agree with what Louis did. I'm just, my heart goes out to him. But he says, if you think I'm okay with it, you'd have to have Down syndrome, which digs him an even deeper hole, right?
Right. So that's not the apology they want.
No.
Yeah.
So Norm has to go back on The View and go through.
To talk about the Clinton kill list again.
Right. Go through the humiliation ritual of going back on The View and explaining himself. And he actually does a reasonably good job of explaining himself. And he has this very nice thing that I think a lot of people engaged in the discourse could afford to remember, where he's basically talking about like someone like Louis C.K. or Brozan, or even somebody who's committed a crime, and saying, trying to remind you that the person who broke the rule or whatever is also a human being. And he says your heart can break for two people at the same time. Your heart can break for the person who was, say, murdered. And it can also break, and I think this is him doing the Christian thing, your heart can break for the murderer too. I mean, how far they have fallen, right? And he's trying to make that point. And I think he does a fairly good job of laying that out.
That used to be the way we understood things.
That's how I grew up.
That's how I grew up as well.
Yeah.
The de facto way. And now we've fallen into some sort of horrific secular tribalism.
It is with no way out,
no anchor.
There's no forgiveness. Everything is wrong, and there's no forgiveness at the same time.
Wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
Delightful.
Right.
Good job.
Yeah. Good job. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what's funny about this View issue is I think he's doing this weird thing where, and I could be wrong, I could be misinterpreting this, but I'm not the only person who's interpreted it this way. I think he's both being sincere in his apology, and he feels kind of bad, and he wants to make sure people understand him about this, our heart can break for two people, and that he was trying to put together his two friends, Louis C.K. and Roseanne Barr, because they both needed help, and and they could relate to each other. The only two people he knew that could relate to each other in this situation, right? But he also, at this moment, talking about the whole comment he made on Howard Stern, he pops a Mentos in his mouth and he starts chewing it, and he goes, "That's the moment I realized I'd done something unforgivable." And I think he was trolling him on that specifically, on that Down syndrome point. I think he was like, "Are you really gonna is this really?"
I'm a comedian.
Yeah,
what do you?
On.
Yeah.
Right.
Where is this new line that you keep making?
Right. And then he also makes this other point, because he's experiencing all this flack from the Jimmy Fallon show. And, and then there was questions about whether they were going to continue doing Norm MacDonald as a show. I mean, it got kind of heated. And he also made this point, which was interesting. He's like, the one thing I don't like is I'm getting, I said some things, and I'm getting thrown in with people who did things.
Mm-hmm.
And it is different. Like, you can say, hey, I kind of feel bad for Louis C.K. is not the same as doing what Louis C.K. did. Right.
He doesn't lock you in a hotel room and tell you he feels bad for Louis C.K.
Right.
He just tells you,
he just says he feels bad for
prevent you from leaving, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And he has this quote. He says, "I don't want to get thrown in with people who've actually done something. I barely have consensual sex." Which
joke, make it a joke.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, he eventually, he this all kind of blows over for him in a way. I mean, partially because it's only 4 years later he's dead, and he starts to get ill not long after this. I mean, I don't know exactly what his last televised appearance is. It might have been that episode of The View. I'm not 100% sure, which is but it's not much longer. There's, whatever the case, there's not many of them after that. He's on a bunch of other interviews, and he does some stand-up. He does a very funny stand-up bit right before the lockdowns of coronavirus lockdowns, and you kind of have to think to laugh at him. You kind of have to think back to where everybody was right when it kicked off, when we didn't really know, nobody knew what was happening,
right?
but he's got like one bit in there. He says something like, what does he say? Oh, he says something like, nobody knows how you're gonna die. Well, I mean, we all know now how we're gonna die, but think back a couple of weeks to when you didn't know how you were gonna die, right? Stuff like that. It's pretty funny. Okay, I want to read. Here's the other part of the Norm MacDonald career, because he was also one of the best tweeters of all time, I think.
Right.
Incredible.
Right.
I'm not going to read you a bunch of them, but I'm going to read you a couple. Here's one. These are kind of in random order. Scripture, faith, grace, Christ, glory of God. Smart man says nothing is a miracle. I say everything is. I like that. Here's another one. The Enlightenment, capital E, the Enlightenment turned us away from truth and toward a darkling, weakening horizon, sad and gray to see. The afterglow of Christianity is near gone now, and a Stygian silence lurks in wait. Heavy.
Wow.
Yeah. Now here's him quote tweeting Neil deGrasse Tyson. This is April of 2019. Neil deGrasse Tyson said, "The universe is blind to our sorrows and indifferent to our pains. Have a great day." And Norm MacDonald quote tweets him and says, "Neil, there is a logic flaw in your little aphorism that seems quite telling. Since you and I are part of the universe, then we would also be indifferent and uncaring. Perhaps you forgot, Neil, that we are not superior to the universe, but merely a fraction of it. Nice day indeed." All right. Here's another one that I just thought was sweet, because I wanted us to remember how sweet he was, especially towards the end. This is in 2018. Somebody had tweeted at Norm MacDonald, "Hi Norm, don't know if you will read this. My mom passed away and was wondering if you could give me some words of wisdom. You are the funniest ever." And Norm quote tweeted and said, "Take all the love you have for her, Pablo, and give it freely to all that you meet. Your mom will look down upon you happy and proud." And so he's a sweetheart, right? Now in the After Dark, we're going to talk more about the illness and kind of the story of that illness, and the hints he was dropping in his show and his public appearances and the interviews and things. What I'll say here is September 14th, 2021, just over a year ago, pretty suddenly, I remember it hit me. I came across it on Twitter. It was hard for me to believe, honestly, at first. We got word that he died and that he'd been sick for a long time, and that very few, if any, people really knew how sick he was. Maybe his doctors and maybe his very closest friends. Apparently, even his extended family didn't know. His nieces and nephews and things like that didn't know. His friends certainly didn't know. His assistant and producer, Lori Jo Hoekstra, knew, and very, very few others. We're talking half a dozen people maybe knew that he was sick. I want to read... I got one more thing to read, and then we'll kind of wrap for a bit. This is based on a true story, his 2016 Not a Memoir, written, it's like autofiction, but good, and funny, and takes some interesting turns. I want to read you this thing. It's from here. It's a couple of pages, but I think it's quite good. It's called The Final Chapter. Funnily enough, it's not actually the final chapter in the book, but the chapter is called The Final Chapter. This is from Norm. "There's the way things are, and then the way things appear, and it is the way things appear, even when false, that is often the truest. If I am remembered, it will always be by the 4 years I spent at Saturday Night Live, and maybe even more than that by the events surrounding my departure from that show. As long as SNL exists, then so do I. When people come to see me do stand-up, it is because somewhere in their memory I live on SNL, dressed as a young Burt Reynolds, insisting Alex Trebek refer to me as Turd Ferguson. And they come to see me and I'm old and fat and I don't mention SNL, and I do my answering machine joke, and they are happily disappointed. After the show, they stand beside me and take pictures the way you would with a donkey at the side of a road. They tell me they are a big fan and they don't care what their girlfriends say. They understand me even though they know good and well that nobody else does. I'm dry, they say. The next time I come to their town, they don't show up. It can be difficult to define yourself by something that happened so long ago and is gone forever. It's like a fellow at the end of the bar telling no one in particular about the silver medal he won in high school track, the one he still wears around his neck. The only thing an old man can tell a young man is that it goes fast, real fast, and if you're not careful, it's too late. Of course, the young man will never understand this truth. But looking back now, I can see that my life since SNL has been a full sprint, trying with all my might to outrun the wolves of irrelevancy snapping at my heels. It has all been in vain, of course. They caught and devoured me years ago, but not completely. Lorne would see to that. My foot would still make a vague imprint, myself would still cast a faint shadow, and years later I would write a book. Not only write it, but be in it as well. I think a lot of people feel sorry for you if you were on SNL and emerged from the show anything less than a superstar. They assume you must be bitter, but it is impossible for me to be bitter. If I've been lucky. If I had to sum up my whole life, I guess those are the words I would choose, all right. When I was a boy, I was sure I'd never make it past Moose Creek, Canada, but I've been all over this world. Except for Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and South America. Oh, and Antarctica. But that's really splitting hairs. I mean, how many people have ever been to Antarctica? I have never expected to be any more than a common laborer, and I would have considered myself lucky to have achieved that, but I was blessed with so much more. I'm a stand-up comedian and have been for over a quarter of a century. I've performed thousands of hours from a small club in Ottawa, Ontario, all the way to a small club in Edmonton, Alberta. Sometimes I get big laughs and think I'm the best stand-up in the whole world, and other times I bomb and I think I'm not even in the top 5. Before I was famous, I had a whole bunch of jobs where all I needed was boots. People would look right past me, or if they did look at me, it was with a mean look. But when I got famous, people would look at me and smile and wonder where they knew me from. If they flat out recognized me, they'd laugh and dance like they'd won a prize, and I'd just stand there and smile and feel warmth from their love. So the fame made the world, which is a real cold place, a little less cold. And as for my gambling, it's true I lost it all a few times, but that's because I always took the long shot and it never came in. But I still have some time before I cross that river. And if you're at the table and you're rolling them bones, then there's no money in playing it safe. You have to take all your chips and put them on double six and watch as every eye goes to you and then to those red dice doing their wild dance and freezing time before finding the cruel green felt. I've been lucky. I love that. I mean, I love a lot of things about it. I love the little humor in it. I love that his final sort of thought is I've been lucky. And I love that thing. If you're at the table and you're rolling them bones, there's no money in playing it safe. I love that perspective. It's sort of like he came to the show and he's going to do it. And this is why that's where the gambling and the humor and the career, it's all entangled. And not to say, you should go out and gamble all of your life savings away, but like there is something to having the balls to do that, right? Whether or not it's a good idea, it's not a good idea. But having that spine to you is indicative of something. And Norm certainly had whatever that thing is.
Norm MacDonald's long shot.
I like that. Yeah.
There we go.
That. I love that.
Brad, are we done?
Thanks,
did you
man.
get to
Yeah,
did you get to the death? Yeah, well done.
We did.
Congratulations. Another banger with the great.
I hope so.
That was a journey, dude.
Yeah, I'm glad. I got to say, this one was tricky because there's the biographical material is so scattered. It's so all over the place. Yeah. So it's difficult to pull it into a single narrative in a way. So I hope people feel like we told the Norm MacDonald story well.
It really landed for me there at the end with that rather poignant piece of writing, and just reminded me, yes, we were dealing with a genius here who understood comedy at a level that very few people ever will. And had his own sense of style and his own voice.
Yeah. And this is the thing you realize as you're going through. It's sort of like you're watching this stuff, and it's one thing to see a Norm MacDonald bit and you find it funny. And it's another thing to really sit there and think about who this guy was and what this stuff meant to him. he would talk about, this is one thing I didn't mention. He didn't think that stand-up comedy was an art. He said that it was a craft. And the reason, and I kind of love this, the reason that it was a craft and not an art is there's only one valid interpretation. Is it funny or not funny? A novel can have all these different subtleties, and you want it to be different, interpreted differently by different people, right? And he had much respect for all the arts, but for him, comedy was about sending a heat-seeking missile out for one target, and that target was to make people laugh. Right.
And so it is. Brad.
Yes.
Well done. Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. What are we talking on the After Dark?
Yeah, we're gonna tell the more specific story of Norm MacDonald's death on the After Dark. There's some stuff in there that's not necessary. A little bit, it takes some digging. So please stick around. It's going to be good.
Support the pod. We've got big things coming next year, including the book club. We love our listeners. Go 5-star it on iTunes. Follow us on YouTube. Do all of the things. Support friend of the show, Blake Hammond. He's got dates coming up. Big Rad Machine. He's a great follow on Instagram. And let's get out of here and come back on the After Dark, Brad. I'll be ready to go. I'll be ready for some more jokes.
Excellent. We'll do a couple of those. We'll do a couple more blue cards.
Yeah, that Brad Kelly guy. The more I read about him,
he's a real jerk.